Hello. Can you guys see me and hear me? Hello, hello. Happy Sunday. We're reading Mackenzie Transcripts. I am so excited. I've been wanting to get my hands on this. Hello. We're going to get right into it. It's fairly long. Hello, hello. Welcome back. I'll say hi to everyone. Let me see how long, because we're gonna have to break this into parts. So today, obviously, is part 1. I think it's like 600 pages. That's fine. We'll get through it. Hello, hello. Good to see everyone. Thank you guys for being here. Let's see. Let's take roll. I see Evie. Let me know if I am lagging. I shouldn't be. Okay, I think we're good. I see Evie, Christine, Debbie. I know we have a lot to talk about, but Jeff, hey Jeff, Selena, Kay Hood, Laura, Croy, Startlet, Abelitas, hello, hello, Lindsay Bay, hi Melly, happy to be here for the court stuff. Thank you for being here, Lindsay. What role models? Oof, the tea is hot. I do want to address it, but I don't know if I'll do it here. Ooh, hi Tamara. Lots of stuff going on, huh? Yeah, I'm aware. So, but I'm the unprofessional one, right? Yeah, okay. Hold me back, please. Hold me back. Kidding, but not kidding. Okay, let's get started. So, we have, hey Danielle, hey J-Lou, Melly's here, Vicky, hello, hello, Edith, good to see everyone, Heather, Chucks, Janie, hey, Boo Boo, hi, hello everyone, thanks for being here. Hoodies, good to see you. Hi Ramon. True Crime Nicole, hi, I'm new here. Hi True Crime Nicole. I have no idea what is going on. We're reading the 2023 probate hearing transcripts for Mackenzie, the probable cause hearing. I have not looked over these myself, so let's get into it. Please make sure you guys hit the like button too. Okay, let's see. Are you guys ready for this? Hi, Adrienne. Hello. Oh, let me put chat up. Yeah, I know. We need to address the disrespect. But we'll do it later. Let's get into these transcripts. Not cool. Okay. Hey, Per. Good to see everyone. I know. Hello, Crystal. I'm gonna hold back from getting into that right now. So this says audio recording hearing held before Judge Jennifer O'Malley, March 2nd, 2023, commencing at 12:27 p.m. We have Timothy Troop, the assistant prosecuting attorney, Allison Kupak, Stephen, Rocco, and James McDonald on behalf of the child. Okay. Let's see. Okay, here we go. This is gonna be good. Have not looked over these. I'm so excited. Hey, Boomer. Hey, Nemo. I need some merch. Girl, like a respectfully t-shirt. I know. Okay, that's a good idea. I might take you up on that. Do I have to give you 10%? Yeah, we will. Let's see. Judge says, good afternoon, everyone. We are here in the matter of the state of Ohio versus Mackenzie Shirilla. We are set for a probable cause hearing today as it relates to the complaint filed by Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office on November 4th of 2022, as well as a motion for an order to relinquish jurisdiction. Oh, filed by the prosecutor's office on November 7th as well, as the notice of mandatory bindover requesting a probable cause hearing also filed on November 7th. If the parties could please state their name for the record, starting with the state of Ohio. Troop says, Tim Troop on behalf of the prosecutor's office, Your Honor. Seated at the prosecution table with me is Detective Zaki Hazoo. Okay, we have questions for Detective Hazoo. He's with Strongsville Police Detective Bureau and Allison Kupak. Kupak? Miss Kupak. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Mr. Vernia, Mr. Vernia says, Rocco Vernia, also on behalf of the state, Your Honor. The court, okay. I normally do not ask victims' family members to state their names for the record. If anyone wanted to, you are free to. Otherwise, I will just put on the record that the entire side of the courtroom behind the prosecutors are members of the victim's family. Mr. McDonald, he responds, Your Honor, may it please the court. My name is Jim McDonald and I represent Mackenzie, Shirilla. The court says, okay, thank you. Mackenzie, can you please state your name for the record? Kenzie says, my name is Mackenzie Shirilla. The court says, thank you. In the back, on behalf of Mackenzie's family, Natalie Shirilla states, Natalie, her mother. And the father's a potential witness. So he's out in the hallway. Okay. So he wasn't in there at all. The court says, okay, who else do you have with you? Kenzie's aunt says, I'm Shirilla's aunt. The court says, okay. The aunt says, Stephanie, I'm her aunt. The court says, okay. Grandmother is there as well, Diane, and her grandfather. The court says, thank you. All right, any preliminary matters that we need to address before getting this started? Tim Troop says, I believe there's one, Your Honor. At this time, the state of Ohio moves the court to dismiss its entirety count 13, count 16, count 17, and count 18 of the complaint. The court says, okay, thank you. I assume there's no objection to that, Mr. McDonald. He says, no, Your Honor. The court says, okay, so we will be proceeding on counts 1 through 12 and then 14 and 15, correct? Troop says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, all right, before we get into testimony and opening statements, Mackenzie, as you are aware, the state of Ohio has filed this complaint against you. They have also filed a motion to relinquish jurisdiction, which is what we refer to sometimes as a bind-over motion, okay? They've also filed a notice of mandatory bind-over. The state of Ohio believes that based on your age at the time of the alleged offense and the facts as they believe they exist, that you are not amenable to care and rehabilitation within the juvenile court system, and that the safety of the community requires subjecting you to adult sanctions, okay? So when the state of Ohio files motions like this, the only thing the court can do once that motion is filed is proceed with what's called a probable cause hearing, okay? Because you were 17 at the time of the alleged offense, you are charged with a category 1 offense in count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so those are the aggravated murder and murder charges. Those are considered category 1 offenses. If the court finds that the state meets their burden as it relates to probable cause for those counts, that's what requires this to a mandatory bind-over. So if the state meets their burden, the court then is required to relinquish jurisdiction and transfer your case to the adult general division, okay? If this happens, you would, at that point, receive a bond, okay, which is one right you do not currently have on a juvenile matter. And if that does happen, then you would be transferred to the adult general division, where your case would then be presented directly to the grand jury for indictment, okay? So the state of Ohio, obviously, you have the right to have the probable cause hearing. The state of Ohio needs to show that there is sufficient credible evidence. That's what probable cause means. Okay. Hi, Nisi. Hi, Drakey. What is she reading? Courtney. Why did I say Courtney? Kenzie, bind over juvenile court hearing transcripts. Hi, Nisi. Hi, Alicia. Doreen, Neat Noodle. Hello, hello. Good to see everyone. Thanks for being here. Okay, so let's continue. So at this stage of the proceedings, the determination is what is the proper jurisdiction of your case? Does it stay in the juvenile court or should it be transferred to the general division? So the state needs to show just how probable cause as it relates to all of these counts. If they show the probable cause as it relates to the category 1 offenses, that requires a mandatory bind-over. If the court does not find as though the state of Ohio has met their burden as it relates to the mandatory bind-over aspect, this case then just becomes a discretionary bind-over, okay? So if it becomes a discretionary bind-over, you would then be referred to the diagnostic clinic for a Rule 30 evaluation, which is like a psychological evaluation. We would then come back for a second hearing, which is called an amenability hearing. At that hearing, it would be left up to my discretion on whether or not you would be amenable to rehabilitation and services within the juvenile court system. And there are a bunch of factors in the Ohio Revised Code that I would be required to consider and weigh those factors and make a determination. If at that conclusion of today's hearing, I find that the state has not met their burden and I do not find probable cause, then your case does not get dismissed. Okay. That means that just means the case stays here in juvenile court and we would proceed with trial on a different day. Do you understand of that all of that? Yes. Mackenzie says, yes, ma'am. The court says, okay, so do you have the right to be represented by an attorney? And I know that you have Mr. McDonald here to represent you. You have this hearing today and you have the right to hold the state of Ohio to that burden of probable cause. You will have the right through Mr. McDonald to question any witnesses that the prosecutors bring in to testify. You also have the right to subpoena your own witnesses. Interesting. A subpoena is a court order to bring these people in here to testify and present evidence on your behalf, and you do have the right to remain silent. You could choose to testify or not testify, and if you choose not to testify, nobody here can comment on that silence, and that cannot be used against you because you have that right under the Fifth Amendment. Do you understand all of your rights? Kenzie says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, I know that's a lot of information to take in. Then we will get started. Are there any stipulations or anything we need to address before getting started? Tim Troop says, one moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, Mr. McDonald informed me that he will stipulate to the age and date of birth of Mackenzie Shirilla, date of birth being August 2nd. The court says, okay, is that correct, Mr. McDonald? He says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, okay, Mackenzie, what that means is the state of Ohio, some of the things that they would need to prove is that the court has jurisdiction to even hear this case, meaning that you were a juvenile at the time of the alleged offense. Okay. So a lot of times people will stipulate to their date of birth, just saying that the court has jurisdiction to hear your case. If you were not willing to stipulate to that, the state of Ohio would have to get your date of birth and either through the detective or by calling one of your parents or family members to the stand to testify. So that's what that means. Mackenzie says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, okay, I will accept the stipulation, and that was to her age and date of birth. All right, anything else? Tim Troop says, no, Your Honor. McDonald says, no, Your Honor. The court says, okay, opening statement on behalf of the state. Tim Troop, here we go. I'm wondering what's the same thing. I'm wondering if that's the same thing or if that was something else. What did it say about a psychological hearing if it got bound over? I thought remember Natalie talking to Chris Cuomo saying that she never had anything like that done. Interesting. Hi, Sarah. Hello, Ozzy. Team Truth, no matter what it is. I like that. Hey, Jen. Hey, Melly, starting from the beginning. Good to see everyone. This is interesting. Tim Troop says, thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Your Honor, on the screen is State Exhibit 4. This exhibit will be later used to inquire of the witnesses. This is a Google overhead of where this event took place. This is Progress Drive in Strongsville, Ohio, where on July 31st, at about 6:15 in the morning, a passerby saw a catastrophic car crash. The car had crashed where this arrow indicates in the corner of a brick structure, the Plitco Company. Progress Drive runs down an industrial sort of parkway, and it's a little over 7/10 of a mile long. The emergency people, police, fire, they responded and they found a 2018 Toyota Corolla that was driven by Mackenzie Shirilla put into this building. Also, in the car were the bodies of Mackenzie's boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his friend Davion Flanagan. When the emergency personnel arrived, the car was already cool to the touch, and the subsequent investigation revealed that the car crash had occurred approximately 45 minutes before the wreck was found. The initial reaction from the responders, from anybody who heard about this, was that this was a group of young folk and that they had been carrying on and partying. Mackenzie was a recent Strongsville High School graduate, and that somebody had lost control of the car, and that was what had caused this. Lost control of the car. As the investigation was undertaken, the police continued to look to try to explain this horrible crash. And with each peel of the onion that they unraveled, each piece of evidence that came back to them led them to believe that this was an intentional act. The police started interviewing witnesses. They learned that the three youths had gone to several friends' homes that night before proceeding Saturday night on July 30th, but they learned that these weren't parties. Witnesses that talked to the police told them there was no drinking. They told them that Mackenzie was not using rugs and she was not ingesting alcohol. In fact, she was sleeping and watching South Park. They learned about the relationship between Mackenzie and her boyfriend Dominic, that the relationship had become strained and volatile, and they uncovered evidence of a prior incident, and that happened on July 17th out on I-71 headed north from Strongsville. And the police talked to an eyewitness who had witnessed an event that happened there. And there are phone conversations, text messages to corroborate what the witness told the police. You guys want to know what's kind of creepy is I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the only witness to this crash is no longer here on earth with us physically. I believe he passed maybe not long after the crash, which is eerie. They don't even have her correct car listed. How can you take them seriously? I know, I'm just reading these. Didn't the first responders say the car was still hot? Yes, they did in the body cam. She was watching on her TV. Hey, Lisi. Thank you, Nisi. I appreciate you. Man, many even 16-year-olds get charged as an adult, so it's not surprised 2 days before she turned 18, she was charged as an adult. What's interesting about being charged as an adult is that, like, once you turn 18, it's not like your brain automatically grows into like, oh, I'm an adult now. Like, we all know that. Let's keep it so for real. So I have a problem with that, but again, it is what it is. Yes, I heard it was only a few weeks after the crash. No. The guy on the bike, you know, the one that called in to crash. The guy on the bike, the motorcycle, he passed away a couple months after the crash. Not hench, y'all. Why are you guys saying hench? No, the older guy. Yeah. The guy on the motorcycle called in the car accident. A couple of months later, he died in a car accident. Isn't that like a coincidence? No, I don't really believe in those, but let's move on. It says, but he told them that Dominic Russo's mother received a telephone call from Dom saying, I'm out of the car. I'm out on I-70. Wait, what? Okay, let's go back. There are phone conversation, text messages to corroborate what the witness told the police. But he told them that Dominic Russo's mother received a telephone call from Dominic saying, I'm out of the car. I'm out on I-71. I need help. Come and get me. Mackenzie's trying to wreck the car. A man named Christopher Hench, responded to the side of the highway. And as he was driving to the scene, he told detectives that he was told on the telephone with Dominic Russo, and he overheard Mackenzie say in that telephone call, I will crash this car. So, like, technically it's, I guess, not hearsay because he's a witness, but we're going off what Hench says. I don't know if that's credible. That's just my opinion. So, hate me if you want. Alicia says, hi, Melanie. I've been watching you for a couple months and I really enjoy your channel. Thank you. I have questions about that after I saw that Miss Russo bailed or got a refund for Hench's bail. So I don't know. I know she's in the legal field, but I don't know. That's just my opinion. Mr. Hench went to tell detectives that when he pulled up behind the car, the same Toyota Camry that he observed Mackenzie Shirilla physically strike Dom. I'm going to show you several videos that took place 3 days after the incident, and this occurred in Dominic Russo's house where he was surreptitiously recording Mackenzie as she beat on his door and she berated him, belittled him, and broke the doorknob and threatened to cause damage to his house. Those phone calls are important because they carry the theme of the case, which is this was a relationship between Mackenzie and Dominic where she was in control and she was a dominant person. No. Respectfully, no. I do not agree with that even after all those text messages. I think they were both into this toxic behavior and relationship. I used to think it was more Kenzie, but as I'm reading them through and everything else, it's just like it takes two to tango. But if Dom was out of the car already, how did Hench hear her say that? Good question. Yeah, but Christine Russo said she was on the phone with Dom until Hench got there. That's what I thought I heard too. Legally, if it's an exception to hearsay rule because it's a statement of a party, the defendant. But the interesting thing to me is Hench's statement could literally be true but misinterpreted. I don't know. Both were toxic, but only one killed the other. I think Dom's mom and Kenzie's parents saw a lot from both of them over the I think Kenzie's Dom's mom and Kenzie's parents saw a lot from both of them over the years. It was over the phone he heard supposedly. Yeah, I know. And like really, it's a fight going on in the car. And if he only heard that one sentence, I don't know, let's move on. She was willing to resort the violence to control Dominic. You'll hear testimony from the detective that he interviewed Angelo Russo. That's Dominic's brother. And Angelo Russo provided more information about the volatile relationship between these two people. Christine Russo provided a statement. This is Dom's mother. She provided more information about the nature of the relationship and that Dominic was trying to get out of this relationship. When they investigated the crash, a Strongsville detective uncovered several videos, and these videos are so important to the case. The first video is taken at approximately 5:34 in the morning, and it shows up the Camry driven by Mackenzie down Pearl Road, and it shows her put on her blinker. She's driving slowly and very controlled. She's driving slowly and very controlled. Hmm. Well, it's a little too late now, Jakey, which means she was already pulled over. Yeah. Hmm. Jeff says more Russo lies. Um, she takes a controlled right turn onto Progress, not speeding. The next video is from the yellow circle here. This is Parma Movers. It's maybe two-thirds of the way down the street. It's about 3/10 of a mile from the ultimate impact site. And there's a video there that shows the Camry as it goes by. We had an expert from the Ohio State Patrol who reviewed that video along with the other footage and did an expert reconstruction of the crash scene. And his report ultimately concludes that when Mackenzie drove the car past this spot on Parma Movers, she was driving 97 and 90 miles per hour at that point, more than approximately a quarter of a mile from the impact site. The third video was taken from this Eurofins test oil site where the yellow circle is here and it actually shows the crash. It shows a car as it leaves Progress Avenue and hits a sign that is out in front of the Plitco building before ultimately impacting the building. I just feel like I don't know. I just feel like either Hench lied, Angela lied, Christine lied, or they all did because none of their stories line up. Kenzie has the anger issues. Actually, I beg to differ now. I started reading them on my own. We're still going to continue the readings on here this week, but remember when Dom used to say he would bang his head against the walls? Like, I don't know why Kenzie is the only one with the anger issue. And when he used to threaten her to blackmail, they both used to do that to each other. Additionally, forensic evidence conducted at the event data recorder or the black box taken from the camera. We have an expert who's going to testify about that, and he's going to tell you evidence consistent with the accelerator never being lifted, 100% acceleration for at least the last 5 seconds before impact. He will also tell you that the service brake pedal in the Camry was never depressed. We had the Camry examined by a forensic mechanic. He examined all of the working parts. We have engineering reports from Toyota service records from that Toyota. The ultimate conclusion was there was nothing wrong with that Toyota. There was nothing about that car that mechanically contributed to this crash. The police obtained search warrants and got Mackenzie's blood samples, and they got her medical records. I wonder if they'll mention the lost sample here. Frankly, I'm not victim shaming when it's facts. Even if the Russos are liars, it doesn't change what Kenzie did. Did she do it intentionally? We don't know. We could say that she did, but we don't know what happened in that car. Respectfully. Kenzie and Dom's texts reflect exactly what happened that day, and Dom totally admitted to turning the wheel. I can't believe the Russos got away with this false narrative. I'm sorry, I'm not believing Hench, someone who lives in the Russo household, respectfully, or did. Even if they were lawyers, like, why are you living there? That's weird. And he's the only witness. No, sorry. Saying that Russos are liars is a factual statement and not victim shaming. Sad fact, but also very true. Let's continue. You will hear from the doctor who treated her what she was treated for. You will hear evidence supporting the conclusion that this was not a medical emergency that caused the crash. At the end of the investigation, systematically, piece by piece, 4 months, the detectives were left with but one conclusion. They eliminated any other reasonable explanation other than a calculated effort to take life. And so, Your Honor, our burden here is low. It's some credible evidence to each element, and that's what I intend to show. Something more than mere suspicion. Credibility will be a factor, and Your Honor, I want to be held to that burden. We do not have to disprove hypothetical or alternative defense theories, and I will make no effort to do so. I want to show you the evidence and what the investigation revealed. Thank you. The court says thank you. Mr. McDonald says, Kenzie's lawyer, Your Honor, may it please the court. It appears that the prosecutor's theory has shifted from that this was a suicide to now it's an active choice of purposeful with prior calculation and designed to kill somebody in this car. So first they said it could have been an accident. Then they say it was suicide. And then they go with it was intentional. I get what Melanie is saying about one source being slanted possibly. Okay, maybe that needs further looking into. I don't know. Saying the Russos are good people would be like saying the sky is green. I'm just reading. The blood test from the hospital was lost, but they were able to get her blood from the flight med. Angelo's an adult and should have been on his own during the interview, just like everybody else was. She gets a lot of special treatment in that city. Yeah, re-listen to those on your own. I have them all under my videos tab with no commentary. Let's continue. It appears that it doesn't make sense. They're going all over the place. Thank you, McDonald. They are going all over the place. And I can't get past that interview with Miss Russo where they say, what judge are we going to pull? And then he says, one of the detectives says, oh, we got the game. We know what's going. We know what to do. Don't worry. Sus. Don't just take one bit of information and take all of it. There's a bigger picture here. Jesse says, yes, there's paperwork where Kenzie was diagnosed with POTS in 2017 by a neurologist. Let's continue. Mr. Troop has said some credible evidence. Well, actually, I think it's sufficient credible evidence is the actual definition. And I hesitate to go over this because you obviously know it, but aggravated murder is purposely and with prior calculation and design purposely. Get that. Then murder A is purposely caused the death or murder B. The murder A is purposely caused the death or murder B caused the death of approximate result of committing the felonious assault. And obviously the felonious assault also has a purposeful in it. So those are the charges that are mandatory. Purposely is a specific intent to commit a certain result. Now, when we talk about the mens rea, the other thing, the lesser element is the term knowingly. When a person's aware that a conduct will result in a certain result. That mens rea is not knowingly. It's higher than that. Purposely, prior calculation and design. I made a little bit of fun with Mackenzie when I talked to her that she weighs up to 100 pounds today, she told me. They opened the door. They're saying she's a violent person and that she controls everything. Well, we'll just hear about Mr. Russo, and I'm certain at the conclusion of this, you will find the prosecutors have failed to meet their burden. Interesting. We do want to hear about all of it. Give us all the public information. It's called Freedom of Information Act, baby. Look into it. For those saying it's victim bashing, it's not. Thank you, Chucks, and thank you, Chucks, for gifting a membership. I appreciate you. And welcome. Who got it? Danielle. Welcome. Yes, I fully believe that Mom Russo has a lot to. And hey, listen, I'm just reading comments, and you guys are entitled to say whatever you want. I will not shut you down. I am not like that. Anyone who tells you to stop supporting people because of that is gross. So your opinions are welcome here as long as they're respectful and have like an adult conversation. We can have fun, but I'm not going to do that. There is no such thing as a perfect victim. We all have a past and skeletons in the closet. It's okay to look at their past without exploiting the victim. Melly is doing an amazing job showing the facts. Thank you, hoodies. That means a lot. Thanks, Jen. Melly is in fact that girl. Thank you, Jen. Okay, let's continue. And I'm certain, the court says, thank you. You may call your first witness, Miss Kupak. I'm just going to call her that. I don't know if it's Kupak or Kupach. Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Captain Brett Stanislaw from the Berea Fire Department. The court says, can you come right around here, please? Please raise your hand, Captain Brett. Sworn or affirmed. And the court says, you may take a seat. You may proceed. She says, thank you. Direct examination of Captain Brett Stanislaw. Question. Good morning. Good morning, he says. How are you? Well, you? Good, thank you. Could you please state and spell your first and last name for the record? Sure. My name is Brett Stanislaw. Question. Thank you. And do you have a specific title that you go by? Yes. I am a captain for the Berea Fire Department. Thank you. Captain, are you employed? Yes. Where are you employed? I work full-time for the city of Berea as a captain, and I work as a part-time firefighter pulling rank of captain for the village of Brooklyn Heights. And let me first ask you, do you have any particular training that you had to initially go through to become a fireman? Response. Yes. You start as an ENT basic, and then my path was I went to ENT basic, then I got my fire certification, then my paramedic certification. Okay, and as far as being a paramedic, how long have you been a paramedic for? He responds, probably going on 19 years. And a fireman, how long have you been a fireman? 19 as well. 19 years. And captain, you said you work for 2 departments, is that correct? Correct. Okay, what was the first department you worked for? I started out part-time as a firefighter in May of 2004 for the village of Brooklyn Heights. I since rose up through the ranks and I'm currently still employed with them. Then I was hired full-time for the city of Berea in August of 2005. Held the rank of firefighter for around 6 years. Was promoted to lieutenant for 2 years and then has been a shift captain ever since. Okay, thank you. Captain, could you tell us a little bit about your ongoing education and ongoing training to maintain both your paramedic and ENT commissions and certifications? Sure. I don't 100% know the exact hour requirements, but every 3 years being certified as a paramedic and firefighter, we are to re-up or redo our certification. There's a minimum hour requirement both for fire and for paramedic. Paramedic, I want to say, is somewhere around 96 hours in a 3-year period. Firefighter is somewhere around 40 or 50. I don't know off the top of my head, but we get far more than that. Question. Okay, are you up to date currently on all of your training and certification hours? He says yes. Do you have any other additional specialties or trainings that you've ever taken since you were a captain? He says yes, our medical control. They require us to have what's called a BLS, which is basic life support, ACS, which is advanced life support, PALS, which is pediatric advanced life support. My part-time employer previously made us have a certification called ITLS, which is International Trauma Life Support. I don't currently have that anymore, but that doesn't really change the level of care we provide. I'm also a hazardous material and WMB technician, state certified fire inspector, and a state certified fire instructor. Thank you. And with regards to all of those additional specialties, are you currently up to date in all of the certifications and trainings? He responds, yes, regardless of the one you just stated. He says, yes. Thank you. Captain, I'm going to briefly just ask you if you could explain the court what your daily duties are as captain in the Brea Fire Department. He says, I'm still what's called a line firefighter, meaning I'm involved with suppression and emergency response activities on a day-to-day basis. The Brea Fire Department, we have 3 24-hour shifts. I am currently on A shift, but at the time of the incident that we're here for, I was on B shift. But both our department operates on an 8 a.m. start time. We work all the way till 8 a.m. the following day. My job as a shift captain is to be in charge of the day-to-day operations and response to emergencies. I start my day off by assigning all the members that I have on my crew to whatever their writing positions are for the day, conducting any training we need, conducting any inspections that are carried out, and just be in charge of any incidents that may arise. Okay, and if you could just explain for us, say, a typical call at the fire department, how many guys are out on a call? He says it can vary day to day and it also varies call to call. We have a 7-man shift, so our minimum training is 5. So there's anywhere between 7 and 5 guys, depending on time off, but there's always 5 guys. If we just receive a call that involves a medical emergency that can be deemed BLS in nature, meaning like a less severe call, there's an initial response of 3 firefighters, possibly 2 firefighters, and an officer and an ambulance. If it's something that sounds like it's more serious than medically, it would be a full complement of members. The fire engine would be following behind the ambulance. If we get any type of car accident, it's an all hands response if it's in our city. If we get a fire call, it's an all hands response with the engine and the ambulance as well. Okay, thank you. Is there a time ever where the Brea Fire Department will assist other cities in either a fire or an emergency? He says, yes, there's 2 forms of ways that we provide assistance and also receive assistance. One, mutual aid, which is typically reserved for an ambulance call. Ambulance calls seems to be the majority of what we go on from time to time. If, one city is overwhelmed or if we're overwhelmed, we request mutual aid, and that's just something we need to request assistance from an outside agency to come into our city, or we are requested to go to their city. There's another form called automatic aid, which is if there's some sort of like a verified fire or multiple calls on a fire, that something is large scale incident. There's multiple units from multiple cities dispatched at the same time. Okay, great. Thank you. After you are dispatched to a call, whether that be an emergent call or a call for a fire, could you explain to the court how your department documents your progress, documents your responses, and documents your treatment of an individual on the scene? He says we have 2 forms of documentation that is done for each call. There's an NFIRS report, which is basic. It's called a National Fire Incident Response System that categorizes the type of response into a code. For fire calls, there's much more in-depth narrative that is provided in the type of incident. That is also done for a fire and EMS calls, but is essentially gathers all the times and it's used for statistics at the state level, and I think the national level as well. When we would go on an EMS call, there's an additional report that's filed. It's a patient care report. The times that are gathered or our response time of dispatch, response, and patient care, those are all incorporated or automatically generated from our dispatch center. Okay, great. Thank you. Captain, you said before when I was questioning you, you said on the day of this incident, I was working B shift. Do you recall that? He says, yes. Well, I was assigned to B shift yesterday, but forgive me. I may have been on an overtime A shift now that I think about it because the 2 guys that responded on the call with me. Captain, were you in fact then on duty on July 31st of 2022? He says, yes. And again, for the record, what is B shift? What would that have been? He says it would have been, I believe, an A shift given the 2 personnel that were on the call with me. And now that I remember, I believe I was on overtime that day, but I was working shift work on that day. Okay, and did you have the opportunity to be involved in the call? Yes. Okay, do you recall if that was on, it says inaudible. He says yes. And Captain, did you respond to that call? He says yes. Okay. After you responded to that call, did you document all of your findings in one form of those documents that you mentioned before? He says, correct, yes, the patient care report. And if I showed you a copy of that patient care report, would you be able to identify it? He says, yes. She says, may I approach, Your Honor? The court says, yes, thank you. State Exhibit 6. Captain, I am handing you what has been marked as State Exhibit 6. He says, okay, if you could look at State Exhibit 6 and let me know if you recognize it. He says, yes. And what is State Exhibit 6? He says, this is an electronic copy of the patient care report that I completed. Question. If you could see up on the screen, Captain, is that what is on the screen, the same document that you have in your possession? He says, yes. Okay, Captain, if you could just first walk us through how you received the call to respond to Progress Drive and what you did next. He says, okay, I don't specifically remember exactly what happened. I believe the time of the call was, I know it was in the morning. I don't recall if we were up at that point in time. But what happens at our station is given this time, typically the guys would still be sleeping in, and I would probably be as well. We receive an overhead page that's requesting whatever vehicle it is, and it gives a location and it gives a reason for the response. I do remember getting called for an MVA, a mutual aid squad for an MVA in Strongsville. Question. And just to back you up, you keep saying we received a call at this time and others were sleeping at the time. He says, yes. Is this the time you received the call documented on your report? He says, yes. The time that we receive it at the station is the dispatch time. That would be 6:28. That would be AM. Is that correct? He says, correct. I'm just going to direct your attention below that it says 6:28:26. Underneath, directing you again to what you just described, dispatch, it says en route. What does that mean? He says that is when we are physically in the piece of apparatus, we're responding in and are en route to wherever that location is we're being requested. Okay, and what time was that? He says that was 6:29 a.m. And right below that, if I could direct your attention to where it says on scene, do you see that? He says, yes. Okay, what time is that? He says that is 6:37 a.m. She says, okay, and does that mean, or was that the time you responded to the scene? He says, that is when we arrived on scene and were waiting assignment by the incident commander for Strongsville Fire. The court says, what time is that? 6:30. The witness says, on scene time was 6:37. The court says, thank you. Captain, if you could just explain to the court when you arrived on scene, what did you do next? Let me check in with you guys. Hey, for those of you just tuning in, we're reading Juvenile transcript, court hearing documents. I feel like Davion's story is important. Like, why do we think he was in the car that night? Good question. Oh, Team Truth is good. Team New Trial. Hashtag Team Truth. Since we're announcing teams, Team Truth. Okay, so you guys are Team Truth. Share links and info. She'll look into it. Yeah. I feel like Emma's where she needs to be. Were the charges correct? I think that's what we're trying to find out. She did cause the unaliving of two people, but was it red rum? That's the $1 million question. Why didn't she do it then? I did say this before too. I said she really wanted to unalive Dom. There was, and I don't mean to sound like cold, but there was other ways of doing it? Question mark. Facts, Jeff. No intent, no schmurder. Why didn't she do it then? Nope, it's called being mature and keep an open mind to all the evidence despite personal feelings. I know we're personally involved. I get it. Cooked up investigation by Ms. Russo. I've read the entire FOIA. I promise there are too many people that we know more about that than me. Let's move on. We'll talk in a second about that. When I arrived on scene, we parked our squad a little bit away just to make sure we had maneuverability to go whatever direction we were needed to go. I don't recall what street we are parked on. I got out of the vehicle and I recognized the individual who was in charge from Strongsville. So I walked up to him and I asked what our assignment was going to be. And he advises that we were going to be transporting or rendering care to the driver of the vehicle. He said they were still in the process of extricating or removing the vehicle from the wreckage. So I went back to my ambulance. I told my crew what our assignment was, and we started gathering equipment and putting it on our stretcher and made our way over to near the vicinity of where the vehicle was laying. Okay, and again, just to draw your attention here, underneath on the scene, it says patient contact. Do you see that? He says, yes. And what time was that? Do you recall? He says, that says 6:48 a.m. Okay, and if you could explain for the court, what does patient contact mean? He says patient contact is when we start rendering care to the patient. So there was a little bit of delay from once we arrived on scene to when we were given our assignment. And then there was a little bit further delay, and we began rendering care to the fact of the patient's location and entanglement and entrapment in the vehicle. So basically, there was a big delay. What triggered the investigation? Was it because they found stuff on her or where the friends came in? Or is it standard in every crash that has a fatality? I'm not about liking herself necessarily too much. She could have done it because she just saw red. I feel she would have really turned him into the police before actually intentionally unaliving Dom. I kind of agree with that. I do. She threatened him on that. I don't remember her threatening his life per se. Like I'm going to kill you. Blind rage is very real. Hey Donna, I'm late to here. Thank you. Um, yeah, Jeff. There's no proof of blind rage though. However, there is proof of medical condition on her being on rugs. Let's continue. So there was a little bit of delay from one oh, I already read that, right? Yeah. Okay, so there was a little bit of delay here and more delay over here. So they were still actively extricating the victim from the car at that point in time. So there was a little bit of delay when we received the patient and rendering care. Okay, and at any point in time were you able to come in contact with Miss Shirilla? He says yes. Okay, and when you first came in contact with her, what do you begin doing? He says, I believe there was a firefighter in the back of a Strongsville firefighter that was sitting in the back seat and he was holding C-spine, which is cervical spine. That's essentially putting your hands gently around somebody's neck to prevent their head from moving left to right. I just remember, I don't distinctly remember what direction we ended up getting her out, but we then grabbed our backboard after they were able to lift the dash, cut away what was needed to be cut away. We put a backboard down. I do not recall if we took her out head first or feet first, but we worked in conjunction with Strongsville to get her out of the car. And then once you start removing somebody on a backboard like that, you start just visually checking, if this patient is still breathing. Is the patient conscious? So any over obvious injuries that you can see. And I do remember noticing that one of her legs obviously had an injury to it. You could tell she was breathing, that upon moving, the eyes were sporadically opening with, I'm assuming like painful movements here and there when you're getting somebody out of the car. Okay, were you able to ask her if she could identify herself? He says, at that point in time, we were just asking basic questions. I don't know if I remember asking her name at that point in time. Was she responding to your questions? He says, yes, responding. I don't remember specifically what questions were asked other than like, tell us what hurts or something along the lines of that. Okay, Captain, I'm going to draw your attention. I believe it's the second page of your report. He says, okay. She says, a section where it says protocol 2. Do you see that? He says, yes. And then it's inaudible. He says, yes. Captain says, do you recognize your name on here? He says, yes. Okay. And is it standard or typical when you are inaudible? Inaudible. So she couldn't relate it. To note which ENT or inaudible? He says, yes, it is. I mean, some of the things were done by the other two individuals that were on there, but those findings are reported back to me. So that's why if I'm the one that's documenting it, I'm the one that's putting my name next to it. Okay. And if you could, for the record, underneath where it says times, could you read what time it says? He says 6:48 a.m. Okay. And next to your name, do you see where it says, okay, so they can't hear her. He says, yes. Okay. And it says says ABC. Is that correct? He says, yes. Could you explain to the court what ABC means? He says that's a very basic and simple quick assessment to determine if somebody's airway is patent, if their breathing appears normal and circulation is present. So in this instance, yes, their airway was patent. She was obviously breathing. Breathing did not appear distressed at any point in time. It appeared like there was equal movement of the chest wall. Circulation. Yes, she obviously had circulation going on due to the fact that she was responding. Okay, so as far as her airway, breathing, and circulation at this point in time, those three things were noted to be normal. He says, yes. Captain, I'm going to go down the next category here. Do you see where it says neurological? He says, yes. Next to neurological, it says AVPU. Do you see that? He says, yes. Would you explain to the court what that means, please? He says, yes. This is another grading scale for determining how alert somebody is or their neurological or how intact they are neurologically. So A stands for alert, V stands for verbal, P stands for pain, and stands for unresponsive. Just due to the fact that the patient was not actively having open eyes and like interacting with us on a free basis, we didn't assign her the score of alert. We gave it to verbal because if you would say, hey, how are you doing? Open your eyes, her eyes would open. So that was a verbal response. And if the verbal didn't work and you get a painful response, but since we stopped wherever like the highest level of responses, okay, I'm just going to back up a little. He says, okay. So as far as you said A is alert, is that what you said? He says, correct. So would it be safe to say that an A would be a normal conversation to individuals who have not just sustained a traumatic event? He says, correct. Okay, and you said verbal, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that verbal would be telling someone, hey, open your eyes, and they open their eyes. Is that correct? Captain responds, correct. Okay, that's what you listed on Miss Shirilla at, exactly. He says, correct. Okay, is it correct to say that you wouldn't go further down that list because you had elicited responses at that time? He says, yeah, there's no need to produce a pain stimulus if you can get one verbally. Okay, thank you. After the ABPU, below it says mental status. Do you see that? He says, yes. Okay, there are several categories here. I'm going to go through them individually with you. He says, okay. And if you could just explain for the court why you responded that way. He says, okay. Thank you. Mental status, it says normal. No? He says, correct. Could you explain what normal means and why you said no? He says, the way our documentation report is, if there's any abnormal findings, the default for mental status cannot be normal, cannot be yes as in normal. So that was a first box that you have to check that says no. It was not normal because normally if somebody was alert, they would be freely conversing with you or interacting with you in a manner like you and I are doing right now, which was not the case. So that would render that to be a no for normal. She says, okay. And then just to go down the line a little further, it says confused. Yes. Is that correct? He says, correct. And could you first explain why you responded with yes, confused? He says, okay. So she was confused. I'm reading what you guys are saying. Her lawyer didn't do anything. That's why it's sus. There's no agree to disagree when it comes to facts. Doesn't cause it to stay stuck on the high pedal. Okay. Yeah, I think the POTS is a good excuse. This is so awesome reading these. Thank you. Let's agree to disagree. Oh man. Y'all are wilding out. If Dom was so toxic, why did her parents allow her to keep seeing him? Let me play devil's advocate. I could say the same about his family, especially being in the legal system. Why would you allow your son, who I'm sure you had some control over because he was living on your property, to date a minor, a younger girl? It goes both ways. I'm not victim shaming. Let's continue. And could you first explain why you responded yes with confused? When we were further going on with the assessment, just kind of like asking what your name was or where you are, what happened, she was able to answer her name. What was going on was not obvious to her. So she was not all there. I asked her, do you know where you're at? You know what happened? The answer was no to that. Do you know what time it is? And I believe there was something along the lines like morning day or something like that. And it was kind of obvious because the sun had already started coming up. So that is what gave me that's why I marked it as confused. Okay, question. Okay, and then to jump back to where you put normal, if you put confused, then the answer to normal has to be no. Is that correct? He says correct. It wouldn't let me close the report out. Okay, the question is on the same line, I think it says twice combative. What was your response for combative? He says no. Okay, she says it says hallucinations. Were there any? He says no. Okay, oriented event. What does that mean? What was your response? He says oriented event would be, do you know what occurred leading up to us arriving on the scene requiring you to need medical assistance? So that was obvious. So that was not obvious to the patient. I guess if we thought she remembered everything, like, did I know that? We can't just go based off text messages. I know some of us are stuck on the text messages, but there's a lot outside the text messages. Like, I know we honed in on those, but the text messages alone are just one part of it. Like, there's so many other factors and truths and details that I think matter. Yeah, and dropped her off to another set of parents that allowed an underage girl to stay over and participate in illegal activities. Neither parents are responsible. Let's go on. He says, so not obvious to the patient. He says, okay, there's a question. Okay, there's a few times on here, Captain, where it says normal for a patient or normal for a person. What does that mean? He responds, that means would you expect this person to normally be confused or normally be oriented? That means you would expect this person to normally be confused or normally be oriented. Question, and is it safe to say that the answers to those questions you would compare to a normal 17-year-old girl who had not, again, sustained a traumatic car crash? He says, yes, I just assume given the circumstances, if somebody was driving a vehicle, they're not somebody that's confused normally. That's not their normal baseline. Question. And then in the last section here, it says unresponsive and you put no. He says, correct. Okay. And below that, it says neurological, all neuro normal. Is that right? He says, yes. Okay. Could you explain that for us? Captain says, there's a lot of boxes to check down there, but that just essentially meant that there was proper function of both of her arms and legs. There was not any posturing, meaning like there's movements that your arm do indicate that there's a severe underlying head injury. There wasn't any apparent seizure activity. There wasn't any slurred speech. There wasn't any one sided weakness like you'd find in somebody who was having a CVA or a stroke. Everything appeared intact. You know, when we asked down the road, like, hey, can you feel me touching your fingers or your feet? All the answers were appropriate. Question. Okay, would it be safe to say, Captain, that if Miss Shirilla was suffering a stroke, suffering a seizure, suffering a heart attack, anything of that nature, you would have noted not normal or normal in that section? Is that correct? He says, yeah, if there was seizure activity, we would have noted there was seizure activity. If there was one-sided weakness or some sort of motor or sensory deficit in any one of the extremities, that would have been noted as well. Okay, and again, that states normal. Is that correct? He says, yes. Okay, next, Captain. There's two sections here that says injury. Do you see that? He says, yes. Okay, first injury arm of the right. Do you see that? He says, yes. Okay, could you explain just what you observed and what you had marked underneath that section? He says, again, I didn't specifically like picture the injury in my head. All the calls blended together. Okay, so it's like 50-50, dude. Mr. McDonald says, objection. Miss Kupak says, I can rephrase. The court says, thank you. Detective, if you don't recall from your own memory, if you could just read what your report reflects. He says, correct. Angulated right arm with obvious fracture, distal radial pulse. Okay. And in layman's terms, what does that mean? Captain says, there was a fracture that had deformity to her right arm, and it was very obvious just visually in distal radial pulse means that there is a pulse present further down the body or below where the injury site is located. Okay, next section, injury lower leg right. If you could, for the record, explain what is documented in your report under that section and what that means. He responds, fracture closed. Possible right femur fracture with obviously right dislocated kneecap. And in layman terms, what does that mean, Captain? He says there were signs of an injury that were possible to have a right femur fracture, which is the bone that is between your pelvis and your knee, and the kneecap was dislocated, meaning it was not in the proper position of the knee of the left leg. Okay, thank you. And the last section on this page, Captain, it says head to toe. Do you see that? He says, yes, yes. Okay. The first section is head and neck. Let's focus on that. If you could just explain what the findings are documented in your report for that section. He says, yes, head and neck normal. Yes, both pupils pearl. It's a little bit of different abbreviation than I learned, but that just means that your pupils are responding to light normally. So that was present for both of them. The neck was normal. Okay, chest and back. He says they all check normal. Okay, abdomen and pelvis. He says left upper, the abdomen is divided into 4 quadrants when you're reporting something or trying to assess for pain. The left upper quadrant was normal. The right upper quadrant was not normal. It was tender and it was painful when you palpitated it. The left lower quadrant and the right lower quadrant were both normal, and the pelvis, when you pushed on it, it appeared to be stable and there was not any increase in pain upon pushing on it. So it was normal. Okay, and arms and legs, I believe he just went over that. He says, correct. Okay, thank you. Detective, I'm going to have you turn to page 3 of 6. The next page in your document, if you could please. He says, yes. Okay, is what you're looking at reflected on the Mondo board here? He says, yes. Okay, I'm going to first draw attention to, let's first talk about where it says Glasgow Coma Score. Do you see that? He says, yes. Okay, could you explain for the court what a Glasgow comma scale is and what it means? He says that's a grading system that tells somebody's what their baseline mental state is when you first encounter them, and to see if there's any changes, establish what their baseline is, and track if there's any changes like improving or declining in their mental status. Question. Okay, I see there is an E, a V, and an M. Is that right? He says, correct. Okay, what do these 3 letters stand for? He says, eyes, verbal, and motor. Okay, let's first go with the eyes. If you could tell us, is there a highest number or highest level you could get to for the eyes? He says, yes, 4 is the highest, 1 is the lowest. Okay, and when you say highest to lowest, does highest mean equivalent to or close enough to that of a normal person? He says, yes. Question. Okay, and that would be non-responsive. He says, correct. Okay, what was Miss Shirilla's eye for the Glasgow comma score level at that point? He says, we graded it a 3. Okay, out of 4, right? He says, correct. Okay, can you explain to the court why you graded it a 3 out of 4? He responds, 4 would be just spontaneously opening eyes, and graded it as a 3 because her eyes were closed until you either produced pain or you asked her to open her eyes or asked her a question. Then the eyes would open. Okay, next is verbal. What is the highest level that you can hit for verbal? He says 5. Okay, and what level was Miss Shirilla at that point? She was a 4. Okay, and why was she a 4? Captain says, to be a 5, you have to be alert and oriented to person, place, time, and event. And she was oriented to person, somewhat to time, but not to event. So that graded her as a 4. Okay, and you said that was motor. He says, motor, yes. Okay, what's the highest level of motor you can reach? He says 6. And what is Miss Shirilla? She's a 6. Why did you grade her a 6 and the highest level of motor at that point? He responds, just because if you asked her to try to keep her arm still or like to put your arm down or do some sort of command, she would follow a command. Okay. And the total score, what is the highest level of the Glasgow comma score? He says 15. Okay. And what was her score? He said 13. Okay. And if you look at the section below the Glasgow, comma score. Does her score change as time progresses as she's with you? He says no. Again, I'm going to direct your attention to those two categories there. It says BP. What is BP? So this is highlighted because it's important. So take notes, okay? We're going to have an exam. Hey everyone, it's me. I'm the problem. No, true crime, Nicole. You're not a problem. You're a good girl. You're allowed to be here. Hey, Melly Mods, I'm late. We went to Lake for the weekend. You didn't invite me? How rude. Hornet, I think there might be a lot of things happening in those last 4 seconds, trying to do anything and everything they could. Interesting. I'm catching up on the comments. Thank you, Jakey, for the super. What did Cree say? Hide crappy behavior behind grief. Oh boy. Oh boy. You guys are making me get in trouble. I'm gonna be in trouble. I don't want to be a bully. When he got mad, he would spaz out and grab the wheel. Yeah. The fights were pretty intense on both ends of the people, Kenzie and Dom. Let's continue. This will be good. Blood pressure, he says. Okay, and if you could just read, let's first start with the top. What was the time for blood pressure that you documented? He says the time was 6:49. Okay, so at 6:49 a.m., what was Miss Shirilla's blood pressure? Her monitor read it at 157/125. Okay, what is the unnormal blood pressure? Captain says, I think the normal standard is 120/80. Interesting. So in your training and experience, would you say that this is a higher blood pressure? It would be an abnormal reading. Yes. And the next time, if you could read, what was that section? What that section is, what time? He says 6:57. Okay. And what was the blood pressure there? 144/111. Wait, what did I say? The monitor read 157 or 125. The first time. That would be an abnormal reading. And the next time, if you could read what that section is, what time? 6:57. And that was at 144/111. So hold on, I need to process. So 6:49. It read 157/125. I feel like we're back in school. Yay. Who wants detention? Okay, what is an unnormal blood pressure? I think they're not standard. Okay. 6:57. I'm just trying to keep track for my notes in my brain. 144/111. Again. Okay. And again, would that be abnormal or high? That's high. Yes. Okay. So her blood pressure was still high at 6:57, which was what, like, don't come for me, like a little bit over an hour later? Am I understanding that right? I freaking love you guys, dude. Whoa! Who are you calling a thirsty Kenzie supporter? That is not nice. Who's thirsty? Who you calling thirsty? I hope not me. We're gonna have to talk. Who's calling me thirsty? Nicole, are you being thirsty, Nicole? Yeah, where? We're gonna have some problems here. I missed that one. It's okay. I'll let it go. I can handle that. Mim, are you good? Nobody's making fun of the victims' families. Nobody should make fun of Mackenzie's family either, though. I did, yeah. She's a danger to society. Okay, I'll shut up for now. He says that's high. Yes. Question. Okay, the next section. If you could read pulse for 6:49, what was her pulse? 60. Okay. And for 657, what was the pulse there? He says 90. Okay. And what is a normal pulse? He says anywhere from 50 to 100 is considered normal for an adult. Okay. So it safe to say that during the time period for which you evaluated Mackenzie Shirilla, her pulse was normal? Yes. Her heart rate was normal. Okay. And there's one thing here that says SpO2. What is that? He says that is the blood oxygen level that's present in your body. 100% is the highest you can get. Typically, you're in like the high 90s. Okay, so the question is, okay, so would you say, how would you evaluate that 82 to be? He said it was low, but there's a lot of factors that can go into play with that. Let's look. Let me put this into. Um, I'm just curious on something. A low blood oxygen level usually means an underlying issue with your lungs, heart, or circulation prevents oxygen from properly entering the stream. Normal blood ranges from 95% to 100. Readings below 90% are considered to be low. The most frequent cause as a blocker limit the transfer of oxygen into the blood. Okay, there's a lot. Collapsed lung. Okay, let's continue. Um, it was low. There's a lot of factors that go into that, he says. She obviously was a little bit cool to touch, so that has an effect on how accurate the probe reads on your fingers, just because it measures the blood flow that's at the extremities of your fingertips. So if somebody's cold, obviously it's not an accurate reading. If that reading was time stamped when the blood pressure was going down, that restricts the blood flow to the base of your arm, so that can also cause like a false reading. But that's what it was. Hmm. Thank you. And lastly, Captain, I'd like to bring you down where it says treatment and medication. Do you see that section? He says yes. Let me see what you guys are saying. She lacerated her liver and kidney, I believe, organs. That's internal bleeding. Oh, thank you, Donna. Her weed smoking may not have afforded her an above 95% baseline. She was pinned for over an hour. She had multiple injuries. It's not surprising her blood oxygen level was low. We can start over. Trial, time spent, everything. Run that trial back so she could get 15 more years. She had broken ribs, which can decrease O2. Those readings are exactly what happens when someone suffers a medical episode like a seizure. Hmm. I'm going to look that up actually. Um, Hold on. Let's see. Oh, this is in percentages. Oxygen levels dropping below 90% are, or after a seizure, are considered clinically low and often require supplemental oxygen therapy. During medical seizures, drops in blood oxygen are common because of erratic breathing or apnea. Hmm. Let's continue. It's interesting. Um, thank you. And lastly, Captain, I'd like to bring you down here where it says treatment and medication. Do you see that section? Yes. Okay, I'm going to bring you down to the last portion where it says 655. Do you see that? Okay, and it says treatment, cardiac monitor applied. Could you explain what a cardiac monitor is? The monitor that we used in this instance, there's 4 leads and it just takes a basic reading of your heart and 3 different snapshots that we get, but it's just a very basic check to make sure what the underlying heart rate is or what the individual's heart rate is and what type of heart rate they're in, if there's any ectopy, ec- ectopy or any abnormalities, and we applied due to the fact of the obvious force that was applied in the incident. We wanted to make sure that there was no abnormal heartbeat going on. Okay, and did you find after applying those that there was any abnormal heartbeat or anything wrong with Miss Shrilla's heart? No, it did not appear so. Again, Captain, the last thing here it says narrative history test. Do you see that? Yes. Okay, can you just explain what that portion of the report is for? I'm guessing Kenzie had low BP to start with. I'm not an RN. Why would we say low BP though? Perhaps it could play into her BP not being as high as someone else's normal base. Not saying she isn't guilty. She's not guilty of murder, but guilty of MS, in my opinion. Glasgow comma score indicated that no seizure or stroke occurred. Hmm. A seizure. Yeah, exactly. Pain makes it spike. Y'all are wilding out. Would be weird if she had normal vitals after the accident. Trying to discredit the readings by saying that it was put on incorrectly. We're not an echo chamber. Y'all are on one. I didn't realize there's so many doctors in the chat. Okay, let's continue. This is where there's okay, he says, can you explain what the portion of the report is for? He says this is where we're allowed to elaborate a little more than just what just simple check boxes show. This is generally given oral assessments of the scene and what we found. Anything that needed a little bit more explanation than a pre-generated checkbox can give you. I'm still stuck on that part of the report up here. Let me see. I'm asking AI something. Okay. When blood oxygen levels drop, the body's standard reflex is to speed up the heart for oxygen faster. Okay, I want to do some research on all of that later, but let's continue. Question. Okay, and again, I know you went over this just to reiterate. If there were any signs of a heart attack or stroke or seizure, any type of emergency situation that would have alerted your radar, would you have concluded those details in that narrative? He says not necessarily in the narrative. If there was something in a box that needed a little bit more description, then yes, I would have. But there was nothing I felt necessary to put there. So there's nothing to elaborate on because there was nothing checked prior. Is that correct? He says yes. Captain, after you performed your testing of Miss Shirilla, or while you were performing your testing of Miss Shirilla, did anything significant happen? He says, meaning a change in patient care? I don't understand. Question, was there anything out of the ordinary that occurred while you were evaluating Miss Shirilla's body? He says, oh yes, we did a head-to-toe assessment and we were primarily worried about getting her into the ambulance and out of the elements at that point in time. But yes, when we did get her in there, we started to give a head-to-toe assessment. We actually put hands on somebody and physically palpitate to see if there's an obvious injury. I remember I was palpitating the chest and felt like there was a lump. I don't remember what side it was. I palpitated to see if there was a deformity or something, and I pulled out a bag of substance, what I thought was like mushrooms or something like that, looked similar. And then I put that on the bench seat, and there was also a black container containing what was like a 4-ish by 4-ish inches, maybe like about that tall, looked like a couple old CD cases stacked together for size purposes. And I just removed that and put it on the bench seat next to me. And when the Strongsville police officer entered the ambulance, I just advised him what I had found and handed it to him. Wait, is that true though? Because I thought in the body cam, didn't he throw it on the floor? Am I tripping? She dodged the airbag. Do you have any idea how those explode out of side curtains? She was so alert. She was doing. She even dodged not a bruise. How could she dodge airbags? Well, we know how you feel. You're fine. Um, baseline to leave if you don't like it. Baseline for the majority is that what general averages show, but most people live within a 45 BPM heart rate due to their athleticism. It's the now oxygen saturation. It sat there much longer. It would have been three RIP. So she was an expert driver in the dark and was able to dodge airbag. Damn, she's pretty incredible for having 1 year of driving experience, right? If we're questioning these things, it's a problem. I think it's the appeal of an expert that says something about high lactate. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I want to read that, but I thought I wanted to read you guys a message that I got from someone about the lactase. I'll read it after. Let's continue. Okay, Captain, I have another question for you. Are you familiar with the term hypotensive? He says, yes. Okay, and what is it? That would be if your blood pressure's low. Okay, did you have any concerns at this point for hypotension in Miss Shirilla? He says no. Wait, but didn't he say that the blood pressure was low? Miss Kupak, one moment, please, Your Honor. The court, sure. Detective, where did you transport Miss Shirilla to? To a life flight helicopter that landed on scene. Thank you. Miss Kupak, nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor. The court, Mr. McDonald, he says thank you. This is a cross-examination of the captain. I just watched a body cam recently that wasn't redacted where he throws it on the floor. So I'll have to rewatch the body cam. So does driving 90 miles per hour make you a schmurder? I saw the paramedic throw the shrooms on the floor in the body cam that I recently watched. Seizures can present very differently in people in symptoms and length. Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's continue. Here's the cross-examination. Mr. McDonald says, sir, my name is Jim McDonald. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Sure. Question. If there's any time you don't understand a question, just ask me to repeat it or rephrase it. Fair enough? Captain says, fair enough. Question. But if you do answer the question, then we'll assume that you understood it, right? He says, I understand. Okay, Mackenzie told you there she didn't remember what happened, right? He says, that was my recollection. Yes. That she didn't remember exactly everything that happened. Yes. McDonald says, in fact, she didn't remember anything that had happened, right? He says, no, nothing of the events that occurred there. Question. And that's somewhat typical of people who were involved in a serious car accident, right? Captain says, I was not surprised by that at all. No. McDonald says, you were not surprised at all? Right. Okay. You talked about her blood pressure being high, correct? Oh, it was high. He says, yeah. Was that primarily due, do you think, to the pain she was experiencing? Captain says it could have been due to, so the blood pressure was high and the blood oxygen was low. It could have been due to several factors. Just to be honest, like our monitor. Question. I hope you would be honest. Yeah, okay. Our monitor, if somebody puts the cuff on a little bit too tight, a little bit too loose, there's variables. If someone's moving around while it's cycling, then you get an abnormal reading. But yes, it could have been due to pain. It could have been due to movement, Could have been due to placement of it. Yes. McDonald says, and you certainly have no way of telling what her blood pressure was 30 seconds before the accident. He says, no, I have no idea. McDonald says, no idea, right? He says, not a clue. Okay, and there are many reasons that her blood pressure could have been raised. He says, correct. Yes. Okay, so you talked about a blood oxygen reading of 82. He says, correct. McDonald said, that's unbelievably low, isn't it? Captain says, correct. McDonald says, I mean, like way low. Captain says, yes, it's way low if you're encountering somebody that's at like room temperature normal. Yes, way low. McDonald says, if I came up to you and you tested me and I was 82, what would you do? Captain says, probably ask you to sit down and have an ambulance come. McDonald says, you'd probably think I'm close to dying when it's 82, right? Captain says, you're having some underlying condition that needs to be addressed. Underlying condition. No, don't put words in my mouth. That's a high pressure for a small girl, but it might be from pain. What's the underlying condition? No, she wasn't on Delanton. She wasn't on any of that. Cop went from ambulance back to car crash. He added the shrooms with other items from the car. Oh, vacay coming in hot. Says cops went from the ambulance back to the car crash. He added the shrooms with other items from the car. Ooh. B12, this is about the car accident. Everything else is static and designed to influence our feelings. Yes. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. She's can't be dying from pain. 82 is close to death or serious injuries. Yeah, and he says right here, there's an underlying condition that needs to be addressed. Okay, and what was the temperature like that day? Captain says, I don't remember. I remember I was wearing just a t-shirt. I was a little bit chilly. I don't remember honestly. You were wearing a t-shirt? Captain says, I was. I think one of the guys I was with had a long sleeve shirt on, but I don't remember. The question is, it wasn't freezing? Captain says, no, I mean, it wasn't 32 degrees. No, it wasn't freezing. He says, McDonald says, you found some mushrooms? Wait, I have questions. Um, let's see. An oxygen level of 82 is dangerously low and it indicates severe condition. That means that your organs and your tissues are not receiving enough oxygen to function properly, like the brain. Wow. Um, mm, yeah, okay, let's continue. No, it wasn't freezing. Okay, he says you found some mushrooms. Captain says what I assumed were mushrooms. Yes. McDonald says, and what do you assume mushrooms to be? He responds, I've seen them on previous calls that were identified to me. McDonald says, what are they? He says, they're a fungus. McDonald says, all right, they're a rug, right? That people take. He says, yes. McDonald says, we're not talking cooking mushrooms. We're talking about rugs that people use. Captain says, that was my assumption from looking at the bag. McDonald said, and that was found where? He responds, it was like kind of tucked into her shirt. McDonald says, the shirt? He responds with, yeah, one side or the other. I don't remember. You don't remember? McDonald says, and were you the first officer? Were you the first responder? He says, to the accident? McDonald says, yes. Captain says, no, I wasn't the first responder. McDonald says, okay, when you got there, how many people were already there? Captain says, I'm making a somewhat probable accurate guess on this, but I would say there were probably every bit of 12 to 15 firefighters, and I don't even know how many police officers were there. McDonald says, had any of the bodies been removed from the car? Captain says, when we arrived on scene, question mark. McDonald says, when you arrived. He says, no. McDonald says, how many bodies were in the car when you arrived? The response was, there was 3 people in the car. The court says, 3, you said? Witness says, 3. Yes, 3. And you removed Mackenzie, right? He says, yes, we assisted in removing her to our care. As we were removing her, there were 2 other bodies still in the car? McDonald asked. Captain says, yes. Okay, and there were 2 bodies in the front passenger seat, correct? Captain says, I don't recall there being 2 bodies in the front passenger seat. I know that when we arrived up there, they said there was 3 people that were in the car. I know that we were supposed to take care of the driver, so we went to where the driver was located. I couldn't accurately tell you the orientation of whom else was in the car. Wait, so he's saying that Davion wasn't on top of Dom, but it's in Detective Jesus' report that he was. Am I tripping or no? Blue Kitty says, okay. What is going on? She was cold from the broken ribs, internal bleeding. Thank you, Tamara, for being here. Wish this trial had been live streamed. I could read. I would love to read. Yeah. While she had severe injuries, these vitals are clearly caused by trauma. B12, she went to a concert with his cousin. They were just like Playboy Cardi for Dominic and Davion. That was not a corpse. And his mom was baiting her because she's a lawyer. Okay, let's continue. He says, McDonald says, so you have no knowledge, right? Independent recollection. He says, no. McDonald says, of where the other bodies were. He says, no. What the heck? McDonald says, did you have to extricate Mackenzie from the car by taking off her seatbelt? He says, I did not personally take her seatbelt off, and I do not know if it was on or off. Okay, do you know about the other 2 bodies? He says, I have no idea. That is wild. He's saying, I don't know. I think he means maybe he couldn't tell or wasn't able to see. He says, I have no idea. McDonald says, would you disagree with the Strongsville Fire Department report that says there were 2 bodies in the front passenger seat when they arrived? Okay, so I'm not crazy. He responds, I have no reason to disagree with their report. Question, did you see any evidence whatsoever that any of the seatbelts had to be cut in order to extricate the people? He says, I did not look at seatbelts. No. McDonald says, you don't know that, right? He says, nope. McDonald says, didn't concentrate you with the other 2 people there? He says, no, my focus was on the patient. So we know Dom's seatbelt ended up being cut. Well, it looks like that in the body cam. McDonald says, no further questions. Ms. Kupak says, nothing based off that, Your Honor. Thank you. The court says, thank you. The witness, thank you. Who receives this, or do I leave it here? The court says, oh, you can give it back to the prosecutor. Thank you. Ms. Kupak says, thank you, Your Honor. Our next witness, the state calls Dr. Esther Sang from Metro Health. The court says, does anyone need a break before we call the next witness? Mackenzie, are you good? Do you need to use the restroom or anything? Mackenzie says, I'm okay, thank you. The court says, okay, Mr. McDonald. Mr. McDonald says, I'm all right. The court says, okay, you can step out to go get him and come back. If we need a break between the direct and cross, just let me know and we can do that at the time too. Ms. Kupak says, thank you. The court says, everyone okay temperature-wise? Anyone too warm, a little warm in here? The speaker says, yes. The court says, yes, okay. Hello, can you please come right around here and I'll swear you in? Before you take a seat, can you please raise your right hand? Dr. Esther saying, sworn or affirmed. The court says, you may take a seat. Thank you, Your Honor. May I inquire? The court says, you may. Here's a direct examination of Dr. Esther saying. I think that's her last name. By Ms. Kupak. Question, good morning or good afternoon? Good afternoon. Question, could you please state and spell your first and last name for the record? She says, my first name is Esther. My last name is Saying. Thank you, Miss. Am I saying that right? Thank you, Miss Esther. Do you have a title that you go by? She says, I am a doctor. Okay. And is it okay if I refer you as Dr. Saying? She says, that's totally fine. Thank you. Are you employed? She says, yes. Where are you employed? Metro Health Medical Center. And what is your title at Metro Health Medical Center? I'm one of the trauma surgeons there. Question. Okay, as far as your position at Metro Health, what hospitals do you work at? She says, I work at 2 hospitals within the Metro Health system. Question. Okay, and which 2 hospitals are those? Metro Health Medical Center and Metro Health Parma. Doctor, if you could for the court, could you briefly give us an explanation of your background and qualifications and how you became a doctor at Metro Health? She says, I graduated from medical school in 2011. I completed my general residency in 2016, and I completed my surgical critical care fellowship in 2017. I was hired at Metro Health in 2017 and have been there ever since. Okay, and as far as medical school, doctor, where did you attend medical school? So the name on my diploma is Mount Sinai of School of Medicine. The school is correctly called ICANN School of Medicine. And where did you perform your general surgery residency at? She says, at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And how about your surgical critical care fellowship? Answer, at Utah Southwestern Parker Memorial Hospital in Dallas, Texas. And doctor, what year were you hired at Metro Health Hospital? She says, 2017. Thank you. Doctor, if you could please give the court a brief explanation of what your daily duties and responsibilities are as a doctor in the trauma unit at Metro. Sure. My partners and I provide care for the trauma patients with critical illnesses, patients with emergency general surgery needs, and some of my partners provide burn care as well. Question, you refer to these individuals as partners. Are they also doctors? She says some of them are physicians, some of them are advanced practice providers, meaning physician assistants and NPs. Okay, doctor, while your team is working with the patient and working with an individual, is there any specific policy or procedure that you follow to document the team's findings or ongoing notes during this process? We adhere to the professional standards and the standards set out by the hospital bylaws in terms of documentation. Okay, and how do you document things? She says it's in an electronic medical record. Okay, and as far as the electronic medical records, are these ongoing during the pendency of a patient's stay at Metro? She says yes. And does each person as part of that team have access to those records? She says, so trauma care is a multidisciplinary specialty. I think all members of our team have access to the medical record, but you could also say that even the folks who clean the hospital rooms are part of our team. I don't know if they document anything in the medical record. Okay, thank you. Doctor, if I showed you a copy of an individual patient's medical records from Metro Hospital, would you be able to identify them? She says, I would hope so. Ms. Kupak says, this is State Exhibits 7 and 8. Question, doctor, I'm going to approach you with what has been marked as States Exhibits 7 and 8. I'm going to first hand you binder 7. Doctor, I just handed you Exhibit 7. If you could just look at the first page and let me know what the first page of State Exhibit 7 is. She says the title is Certificate of Medical Records and is the same certification of medical records that you have in your binder on the stand. Does that reflect the certificate here on the Mondo board? She responds, it appears so. And what is a certificate of medical records? She responds, it appears to be a statement from Marshall Martin, who is the maker of the set of medical records. Okay, and if you could read the filled in line, there's underneath where it says clinical records of, what is the name listed there, doctor? She responds, the name is Mackenzie Shirilla. Okay, doctor, have you reviewed these medical records prior to coming to court today? She says, I reviewed some, but not all of the medical record prior to coming to court today. Okay, and I'm going to then, that being said, draw your attention to the same book that you're looking at. If you could please turn to page 13. Mr. McDonald said, "Is this exhibit 7?" Ms. Kupak says, "This is still exhibit 7, page 13." Question, "Are you on page 13?" She responds, "I am on page number 13." Okay, and doctor, if you could read where it says at the top in bold, starting with Metro Health, what does that say? The word Metro Health appears multiple times on this piece of paper. Which instance are you specifically referring to? Ms. Kupak says, "Where it's bolded at the very top underneath where it says your name. Does it say your name anywhere on this page, doctor?" Answer. So on the top of the screen is a little different than the top of this page. Yes, my name appears on this page. Okay, she responds. And then the bolded words say Metro Health Division and acute care surgery, trauma surgery, history, and physical. Okay, and I draw your attention to the bottom half of the page. She says, "That's what I'm looking at." Okay, thank you. I see your name where it says Esther. What is the date and time there? She says that the date listed is July 31st, 22. The time is 7:45 a.m. Thank you. Doctor, when a patient responds or comes to Metro Health in the trauma unit, could you describe for the court how the patient enters and what typically happens at this point? She says, "So we almost always begin with evaluation of trauma patients in the trauma bays at Metro Medical Health. They can arrive by themselves, by private vehicle, or walking in, or they may be brought by a various assortment of emergency medical services." Question. Okay. And with regards to Mackenzie Shirilla, or with regards to, strike that. Underneath where it says Metro Health Division of Acute Care, do you see a name underneath that section? She says, "I see a name, Mackenzie Shirilla." Okay. And is there a date underneath that individual's name? She says, "There's a date of July 31st, 2022." Okay. And doctor, I'm going to direct your attention to the bottom, the very bottom line of that portion. Can you see where it says Mackenzie Shirilla? She says, "I'm sorry, one more time." At the bottom of the page, it starts, "Shirilla, do you see that?" She says, "I do." Okay. And is there a date of birth after that? She says, August 2nd, 2004. Okay. Thank you. Doctor, according to these reports, how did Miss Shirilla enter into the trauma unit that day? She says, "I don't specifically remember her case. What's documented here is that she arrived by life flight." Okay. And after she arrived by life flight, what did she do next or where was she placed? Doctor says, "So this doesn't specifically say which trauma bay she was brought to, but it says that she arrives to the bay. So she was placed in one of our trauma bays." Okay. The question is, okay, and what is a trauma bay? She says, "A trauma bay is a room within the emergency medical department, emergency medicine department, excuse me, which is specifically outfitted for the initial evaluation and resuscitation of a traumatically injured patient." Okay, thank you. I'm going to draw your attention to the next page if you could follow with me, page 14. She says, "Yes." "Do you see that page?" She says, "I do." Okay, underneath the section where it says history of present injury, how do you retain that information that you put into that section? Where does that come from? She says that comes from the information that is entered into the medical record by our team, can come from a number of sources. Okay. She says it can come from the patient and can come from the emergency medical services. It can also come from family members or witnesses. Okay. And according to this paperwork or according to the medical records, did you learn what had been involved prior to Miss Shirilla entering in the trauma unit? We were informed by Life Flight that she was involved in a motor vehicle collision. Okay, thank you. Doctor, I'm going to now just start to go through the page, starting here with the underneath history of present injury. Do you see where underneath the fifth paragraph it says, and then it's inaudible, "Do you see where I'm looking?" She says, "Yes, I do." Okay, could you finish that sentence starting with multiple? Let me check in what you guys are saying. Hi, Lintonero. Okay. You know what? What is y'all are who wants detention? What is going on? Y'all are wilding out. Okay. Let me see. Focus. This is about a text message that she was accusing Natalie. So it has nothing to do with the Shirillas. No. Oh my gosh. So it appears both parents are lying. This is the case. You can't trust anyone if it goes to the box. Oh my gosh. Just because you guys can't handle the truth doesn't make it rude. Hi, Lintonero. Mm, y'all don't want to hear my opinion. No, I'm just reading the comments. They crying, Melly. Who's crying? I just got here. No detention for me. Okay. Let's continue. Be nice. Multiple drugs found in the wait. Can you finish a sentence starting with multiple? She responds, multiple drugs found in the vehicle, including mushroom. Question. Okay. And then it says loss of consciousness. Do you see where I'm looking? She says, I do. Okay. And was there a loss of consciousness? She says, according to the document, yes. Doctor, underneath that next section where it says initial interventions, there's another spot where it says hemodynamic status. Do you see where I'm looking? She says, that's correct. Yes, I do. Okay. And what was the hemodynamic status of this individual? The documented status that we witnessed in the ER, including hypotension, meaning systolic blood pressure less than 90 millimeters of mercury. Does that mean a low blood pressure? Generally, it means a low blood pressure. Yes. Okay, thank you. The next two sections here in bold, doctors say primary survey. Do you see where I'm looking? She responds, yes. Okay, what are primary surveys? Could you explain that to the court? She says, sure. We begin the initial evaluation and resuscitation of the trauma patient according to the standards established in advanced trauma life support, which is the system for evaluation and resuscitation of trauma patients that's been established by the American College of Surgeons. And underneath the section where it says primary, let's first start with airway. It says intact. Is that correct? The doctor says that's correct. Okay. And does that mean normal breathing? Doctor says an intact airway is normal. Okay, breathing, breath sounds. What does it say there? She says normal. Okay, circulation. She says her pulses were documented as normal. Okay, doctor says her skin was documented as normal skin color, texture, and turgor. No rashes or lesions were noted. Okay, and next under where it says visibility, do you see where I'm looking? She says, I do. Okay, it says pupils. And then there's an acronym PERRL. Could you explain what that means? She says this is an abbreviation for pupils equally round and reactive to light. That is a normal pupil exam. Okay, and GCS, what does that mean? Doctor says it's an abbreviation for the Glasgow Coma Scale, coma. And we've heard it prior, but what is the coma scale? It is a quick way to assess a patient's neurological status. Okay, what's the highest level or score reached on that test? Doctor responds with 15. And referring to your records here for Miss Mackenzie Shirilla on 7/31 at approximately 7:44 a.m., what was her coma scale score? Doctor says it was documented as being 15. Doctor, I'm going to now bring you down to the secondary survey. Do you see where I'm looking? She says yes. Okay, if you could, starting with the blood pressure / pulse, what was this patient's blood pressure and what was her pulse? Doctor says, in the secondary survey, we documented a blood pressure of 100/53 mLs of mercury. We documented a pulse rate of 85 beats per minute, a temperature of 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit, a respiratory rate of 25 breaths per minute, a height of 5 feet 7 inches, and a weight of 90 pounds, and an oxygen saturation of 98%. She was tiny. 90 pounds. Okay, I just needed to look at something. Let's all pretend we're in the courtroom, we're taking notes. Comma, coma, tomato. Melly's channel, Melly's choice. Oh, geez. Yeah, loss of consciousness. That is a big deal. I know I didn't ignore that, boo-boo. She does say there was a loss of consciousness, but didn't they say that there wasn't? Hmm. And I don't like that there's like, I don't remember. I don't know through here. Yeah, tiny. Calling mom before EMS arrived. 90 pounds as well. Yeah, it is. Let's continue. What about pulse? She says yes. Okay. And temperature? The doctor says yes, that's within normal range. Okay. And I see for respiratory rate, it has a red 25. What does that mean? She says that means the number is abnormal. Hmm. Um, wait, what was it? Has a red 25. Wait. It says typically 12 to 20 breaths per minute is normal. Okay. However, whether this is concerning depends entirely on context. Okay, I need to look into that. Respiratory rate of 25 breaths per minute in an adult is considered high. Underlying illness, fever, dehydration, heart issues. Hmm, Let's continue. She had a right for seizure. Oh, I don't know. I was honestly surprised the seatbelt worked so well. Hmm. Okay, so it says, what does that mean? She says that means the number is abnormal. Okay, thank you. And what is that number abnormal? And why is that number abnormal? She says that is higher than what we would typically expect. Okay, and what would you typically expect for that level? The doctor says we consider a respiratory of less than 20 to be normal. Okay, and SpO2, what is that? The doctor says oxygen saturation as measured by a pulse oximeter. Okay, and what is the highest percentage someone could have? She says 100%. And what is a percent here? 98. Thank you. Doctor, next we have neurologic. Could you read after neurologic what it states? The medical record states alert and oriented, appropriate strength, symmetrical, no sensory deficits. Okay, head. What's that section? Doctor says what's documented here is no lacerations, bony step offs. That is a typo or abrasions. Mid face stable to palpitation. Ec- Echemiosis over right eye. Okay, and no lacerations. I get that one. What is a bony step off? The doctor says a bony step off is an irregularity in the surface of the bone that can be felt through the skin. Okay. Doctor says it often implies that the bone is broken. Okay, and what is a mid-face stable to palpitation? Doctor says, so there are multiple bones that are present in the face. The mid-face is generally considered to be below the level of the eyes, but above the level of the upper commissure of the mouth. Stable to palpitation can suggest that there may not be any bones broken. I'm sorry, there may not be what? The doctor says a mid-face being stable to palpitation is normal. Okay. Doctor says, and it implies that there might not be bones that are broken. Okay. And echemiosis over right eye, what is that? Doctor says it is a medical term for bruising. Okay. And with regards to the eyes, you've already described that her pupils were reacting normally. Is that correct? That is correct. Okay, doctor. Keep going to page 15, please. Let's go to what appears. What is the long word hemo? The doctor says hematidrosis. refers to a bloody eardrum. Okay. There was no bloody eardrum recognized here, right? The doctor said on either side, that's correct. Okay, what about nose? The doctor says was the exam was documented as septum midline, no crepitus with motion. That is normal. Okay, oral. Doctor says oral cavity without trauma. That is normal. Okay, next. Doctor says no midline tenderness, lacerations, or wounds. That is a normal exam. Thank you. Chest. Doctor says diffusely tender, no step offs, deformities. That is abnormal. Question. Can you explain that for us? Doctor says it would not be normal for somebody to have a diffusely tender chest wall in the setting of being involved in a motor vehicle collision. That is abnormal. It could imply that there was major trauma to the chest. Okay, I think we're at pulmonary and pulmonary cardiovascular. Doctor says breath sounds clear, symmetrical, no wheezes or rails or consolidation. That is a normal pulmonary exam. Okay, pulses. She says bilateral radiofemoral DP and PT pulses are normal. That is a normal exam. Thank you. Abdomen. Doctor says non-distended, non-tender to palpitation, no scars, lacerations, or contusion. That is a normal exam. Thank you. Rectal, pelvic, and inaudible. Doctor says normal rectal tone, no gross blood noted. That is a normal rectal exam. Pelvis is stable to palpitation. That is a normal exam. Okay, and musculoskeletal. She says no step off or deformities nor noted. That is a normal exam. Okay, and extremities. Doctor says gross deformity on the right elbow, right knee, 2 centimeter lacerations to the left knee, range of motion intact in the upper left extremity and left lower extremity. Okay, and adjunct studies. Was there any? The doctor says, so an EFAS was performed by our ER department staff that was positive in the right upper quadrant. A chest x-ray was performed. I believe to be a typo where it says no acute x-ray. I suspect that means no acute fractures. Okay. An x-ray pelvis is documented as no acute fracture. Okay, thank you. Underneath the next section, it says past medical history. Do you see that? She says, I do. Okay, could you explain to us how you would obtain someone's past medical history? She says, sometimes a patient can tell us. Okay. The doctor says, we often receive information from family or friends. Okay, and here it says you talked to the mother. Do you see that? The doctor says, I do. Okay, and would that indicate that the mother was the one that informed? Doctor says, somebody on the team. Question, somebody on the team? The doctor responds, who then entered it into the medical record. Okay, and do you recall we discussed these records prior? Is that correct? The doctor says, we have. She says, the question is, do you recall approximately when that would have been entered? The doctor says, I do not know when it would have been entered. Question, past physical history. Again, where would you have received that information from? The doctor says, we could have either received this information from the patient, a family member, or a friend. Okay, and lastly, pre-admission medication. It says none. Okay, where would you have obtained that information from? Doctor says, we could have asked the patient, a family member, or friends. Okay, so after consultation with any of these people, the only listed here is per mother. It says inaudible. Is that correct? The doctor says, that's the only thing listed here. That is correct. The question is, and no additional medical history listed. The doctor says, there is no additional medical history listed here. Okay, thank you. Allergies. It says no known drug allergies. Do you see that? The doctor says, I do see that. Okay, what does that mean, doctor? It means no known drug allergies. Question. Okay, social history. Do you see that section? The doctor says, I do. And how would the staff obtain someone's social history? The doctor says, we can ask a patient, we can ask their family or their friends. Do you recall in this case that the patient was asked? The doctor says, I do not know if the patient was asked. Okay, under social history, what does it say, please? The doctor says, it says denies tobacco, ETOH, which is a medical abbreviation for alcohol and drug use. Thank you. Turn to page 16, please, doctor. I'm going to kind of go towards the middle of the page. Do you see where it says review of system? The doctor says, I do. Okay. The court says, I'm sorry. What page are you on? Mr. Troop says, I'm sorry, 16. The court says, thank you. Question. Let's first start with the skin. The doctor said, skin lax to left knee and bruising in right eye. Question. And I think you briefly described bruising above the ecchymiosis. I don't know if I'm saying that right, as bruising above the right eye. What is skin lax to left knee? Doctor said lax is medical abbreviation for laceration. A laceration is a tear. This indicates that on our review of systems, we found that the patient had tears in the skin over her left knee joint. Thank you. And doctor, if you could just refer to eyes, ears, nose, and throat, is it correctly based off what you're looking at in your records that both of these or all of these are negative for symptoms? She says, that is correct. Okay, thank you. Next is respiratory. If you could explain for us what the finding was with regard to Mackenzie Shirilla's respiratory system. Ecchymosis. Oh, okay. Thank you. If Kenzie's parent would have told her, you hold the license. I found out there's a case of those. Hey, on apology, Eva. Is it Eva or Eva? Eva Longoria? Was this upon arrival at the hospital? Yeah, I guess. Okay. Let's continue. We documented no systems of cough, hemoptysis, shortness of breath, what is that? Dyspnea of exertion, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, and wheezing. So there was none of that. Okay, so her cardiovascular system was negative for all of those things. Is that what you said? The doctor says her respiratory system was negative for those things. Question, I'm sorry, her respiratory system. Next is cardiovascular. Okay, so he got confused. Doctor says negative symptoms is chest pain, pressure, tightness, palpitations, shortness of breath, exertion, headache, or vision change. Okay, and what about GI? Doctor says negative symptoms of abdominal pain, anorexia, nausea, vomiting, indigestion, constipation, or diarrhea. Okay. Geniturinary? No urinary symptoms. The next section is neurological. Do you see that? She says, I do. Okay. And if you could describe what that statement says. The doctor says, the statement here is negative symptoms of syncope, seizures, weakness, gait problems, numbness, burning pain, tremors, or memory loss. Doctor, what is syncope? Syncope is medical term for fainting. Wait, no tremors or memory loss, but she did lose consciousness. Syncope. Okay, so the question is, okay, so no signs of fainting, seizures, weakness. Can I ask you a question, doctor, with regard to these sections? Does this mean negative symptoms currently, or if you had any type of knowledge that this patient or patient had a history of seizures or weakness, would you note these in the section? Doctor says, as we discussed yesterday, the timeline for the documentation of symptoms and the review of symptoms is not always clear. Okay. Doctor says, if we believe the symptoms are contributory to the patient being injured, I imagine that most of my partners and I would document them here. So for example, if we received a report from emergency medical services that the patient had suffered a seizure prior to the traumatic injury, we would have noted it here. Thank you. Next is psych doctor. Doctor says negative symptoms for sleep disturbance, anxiety, memory loss, disorientation, inattention, feelings of depression. So I'm assuming they were asking Kenzie here. Question. Okay. And then the last, hematologic, lymphatic, and immunologic systems. She says negative for anemia, bruising, or bleeding. Okay. Question. And I'm sorry, the last section is endocrine. Negative review of symptoms is what's documented here. Thank you. Doctor, the next section here is basic labs in bold. Do you see that? She says, I do see that. Okay. And if you could just explain as far as trauma patient, how do you decide what his basic lab is? Doctor says, so when a patient arrives at Metro Health for trauma evaluation, there's a standard set of labs that we get on virtually every patient. That's what's documented in the basic labs. Okay, doctor, we're going to go through these labs starting with page 16 through page 18. I'm going to draw your attention there. Doctor says, okay. There are a lot of labs on these pages. Is that correct? The doctor says there are many lab values here. That is correct. Question. And if you could, doctor, could you just explain starting with the first lab that you see on here that is not normal for Miss Shirilla? That does not come back in a normal standard for a normal person who did not suffer a the doctor says, so the first lab value that is documented under the basic lab section that is flagged as abnormal is in the basic metabolic panel. That is a glucose result, which is 167, which is high for our laboratory. Question. Okay, and doctor, just for the sake of rephrasing or re-questioning my question, I just asked you. I'm going to draw your attention up to inaudible. Do you see that? Why is it inaudible? The doctor says, I do. Okay, and I asked you, are there any results here that are abnormal? Let me first ask you with regards to ethanol. What is a normal value for ethanol for in an individual? Doctor says, for our laboratory, that value is less than 10. Okay, so if you're less than 10, that means that there is none or little ethanol detected in your system. Is that correct? Doctor says, detected in the patient's blood as determined by our laboratory. Okay, and what was the result for Mackenzie Shirilla, her ethanol level? It's documented as being less than 10. Okay, and do you see where it says reference? She says, yes, I do. What does it say there? None detected. That's inaudible. Question. Okay, thank you. Now let's go back to my first question, doctor. You said that the first lab here that is abnormal or high is under the basic metabolic panel that is on page 17. Is that correct? She says that is correct. Okay, and you said glucose level. You said that was high. Is that correct? Doctor says that is documented as being high. That is correct. Okay, what else is next on here that you see is abnormal? She says the next value that we have documented here as being abnormal is the lactate listed under lactic acid. Oh yeah, I wanted to read this part. Mm, high sodium. Hmm, I agree, Crystal. Question is, was it intentional or not? Hey, ATS. Hmm, interesting. What you guys are saying. Um, lactate listed under lactic acid. Question. Okay, and can you explain why that's abnormal? Response. The doctor says that the reference range for a laboratory of normal is zero point 0.5 to 2 millimoles per liter of blood. That value was 3.7. So that is high. Um, hmm. This buildup indicates inadequate tissue oxygenation or metabolic dysfunction. Common causes, heart issues, heart failure, cardiac shock, restrict blood flow, kidney disease. Hmm. Let's continue to see what this says. So that is high, the doctor says. Okay. And next, please. Doctor says, I do not see any other lab abnormalities on this page. I'm going to turn the page. Thank you, doctor. Actually, I want to pull up. Someone sent me a message about the lactic acid. Hold, please. I'm curious what it was said. Mm. Wait. I want to read this because somebody left me a big comment on this. I think it was a health professional too in the comments. Um, why can't I find this post? Um, I swore I had it here. Oh, here we go. No. Okay, yeah. By the way, regarding the elevated lactate levels, high impact crashes cause tiny injury. Shirilla had both and possible internal bleeding. Okay, often trauma patients. And regarding her POTS, she was a very heavy weed smoker. She would have fainted so frequently. In it, having POTS in addition to being underweight, she would have fainted so frequently. Okay, I thought that was said something about lactic. Let's continue. Next, please. She says, I do not see any other lab abnormalities on this page. I'm going to turn the next page. Thank you, doctor. Please do that. Page 18 for the record. Thank you. The doctor says the next values that I see as being abnormal on page 18 are listed under the hepatic functional panel. Those numbers are ALT and AST. Those are liver enzymes. Okay, and if you could explain why those liver enzymes are abnormal. Doctor says liver enzymes may be abnormal for many reasons, including traumatic injury. Okay, and next, please. The next set of values listed as being abnormal are in the complete blood count with differential. The white blood cell count is listed as being abnormally high. Thank you. An additional value that is abnormal is the hemoglobin of 12.3, which is listed as being low. Okay. The doctor says the next value after that, which is listed as being abnormal, is the neutrophil count, which is 81%. The next number after that, which is listed as being abnormally high, is the neutrophil number, which is listed as being 16. And then the next number after that, which is listed as being abnormal, is the lymphocyte count, which is 15 here, which is low. Doctor says, what are neutrophils? The doctor says neutrophils are one of the types of white blood cells in our bodies. Okay, and lymphocytes? The doctor says lymphocytes are another type of white blood cell in our body. Thank you. Doctor, these levels that you just described, high glucose, high lactates, high kidney levels or enzyme levels, high white blood cells, high neutrophils, low hemoglobin, and low lymphocytes, are those results that could be consistent with an individual who just suffered a traumatic injury in a motor vehicle? She says, yes, ma'am. We're on the same page, doctor. Page 18. I direct your attention to radiology. Do you see where I'm looking? Doctor says, I do. Okay, CT of head. What is this CT? CT stands for computed tomography. It is a machine that uses many x-rays to generate 2D pictures of a patient's body parts. Okay, is that also commonly known as a CAT scan? Doctor says it is. Thank you. With regard to CAT scan of the head, if you could please start with injury found. What was the injury found? According to this document, no. Okay. And underneath finding, it says no acute intracranial abnormality. Do you see that? The doctor says, I do. Okay, doctor, what does no acute intracranial abnormality mean? The doctor says it means that as reviewed by our radiologist, there was nothing seen on the CT scan of the head that indicated an acute traumatic injury. Okay, if you did a CAT scan of the head, doctor, would that reflect ongoing disease that was occurring in the head or brain? The doctor says a CAT scan may not detect all ongoing diseases at the time in a patient's head. Question: if a person suffered a stroke, might you be able to see these results? Might you be able to see results? The doctor says it is possible that we could see that on a CAT scan. Okay, and again, that was not noted here or seen. That was not seen here. That is correct. Thank you. CAT scan of face. If you could just briefly, was there any injuries found? Doctor said, according to this document, no. Okay, what about testing of neck? The doctor says, according to this document, excuse me, are you referring to the CT of the neck? Yes, CT of the neck. The doctor says, according to this document, yes, an injury was found. Okay, and what was that injury? bilateral internal carotid and left vertebral artery dissections. And could you explain in layman's term what that means? The doctor says, sure. So sometimes there are certain injury patterns that can cause stretching of the carotid arteries and the vertebral arteries. These arteries are the arteries that feed blood from the body to the head and the brain. Sometimes, when these arteries are stretched during the course of a traumatic event, the lining of blood vessels can tear, and that's what was detected here on the CT of the neck. Question. And again, is that an injury that's consistent with a motor vehicle crash? She says yes. Okay, thank you. Doctor, next page. I'm sorry. On the same page, do you see a CT finding? Do you see that? She says, I do. Okay. Injury found. Yes. Could you explain for the court, please, what that injury means in layman's terms? She says, so the documented finding here we have is an avulsion fracture of the left occipital condyle. The human skull connects to the first cervical vertebra and the occipital condyles. There is a left one. There is a right one. In this situation, the left one was fractured. Thank you. Doctor, I'm just going to bring your attention down to where it says CT left knee. Do you see that? She says, I do. Was there any fractures with regard to the left knee? The doctor says the CAT scan did not document a fracture of the left knee. Okay, it says CT right knee impression. What does that mean? The doctor says fairly displaced, severely comminuted fracture of the distal femoral condyles. And then this question is just inaudible. Sir, can you speak up, ma'am? I think the first responders said that Davion was found sitting on, yeah, but the captain is the one that said he didn't see that. Very true. I'm listening. The passenger said it was demolished, which he had time to remove sides and buckle that belt. Side airbags went off before the intersection, and front airbags went off when she hit the sign. An army of gens. Okay. Let's continue. Wait. Jeff. T. Mackenzie. LLDD. If there are rumors that Judge Russo and Kenzie's attorneys are friends, I have no idea if this is true, but it's common for attorneys and judges to be friendly with each other when not in court. But it is common. We can talk about that on another live because I don't know about that. How do we know Davion wasn't trying to attend Mackenzie's having a medical emergency? No one knows what happened in that car. That's the thing, is true. We don't know. We don't know. Answer. The far end of the femur bone was fractured. Question. Okay, and lastly, it says CT right elbow. Do you see that? Doctor says, I do. Okay, and if you could read what the CT right elbow says underneath it. The doctor says, displaced T-shaped fracture to the distal humerus with 45-degree rotation. Displaced fracture of the sublime tubercle. Tubercle? Question. Okay, was there a fracture or break in the elbow? The doctor says, yes, that's what it means in layman's terms. Thank you. Doctor, in your review of these medical records, did you come to learn as you were reviewing these medical records if there was ever surgery performed on Mackenzie Shirilla's knees? Doctor says, yes, I believe there was surgery performed on her knee. Okay, did you come to find out that there was surgery performed on her elbow? Doctor says, I believe on review of her records that there was surgery on her elbow. And for the record, you did not perform these surgeries. Is that correct? She says, that is correct. Doctor, with regards to the medical records, are you aware if there were any referrals made after, strike that, let me rephrase. Were there any referrals for any kind of follow-up for her cardiac or her heart system? Are you aware of that? The doctor says, I'm not aware of that, but it certainly could have happened. Question. Okay, same thing for neurological. Are you aware if she was referred to any? Doctor says, I'm not aware. Okay, doctor, I know this is going to be kind of hard, but I'm going to hop forward in your book to page 360. Mr. McDonald, what page? Ms. Kupak says 360. Mr. McDonald says, thank you. Question, let me know when you're there, doctor. 360? Yes, 360. Doctor says I am there. Thank you. Doctor, page 360, I'm looking at the top of, if you could see the box where it says neurological exam. That's a box on that page. Do you see that? She says, I do. Okay. And you see where it says neurological exam? The doctor says, I do. Okay. I'm going to reference where it says level of, I'm sorry, strike that. First, I'm going to draw your attention to the upper left-hand corner. Do you see date and time on that document, doctor? The doctor says, it looks like the date and time is July 31st at 7:24. Thank you. So July 31st, 2022 at 7:24, is that correct? The doctor says, that's what I see. Okay, thank you. Underneath where it says neurological exam, level of consciousness, could you read for the record what that says, please? She says, alert. Okay, paralyzed, question mark? Doctor says no. And then it says neuro comments, is that correct? The doctor says the words neuro comments do appear. Okay, what does it say next to those words? The doctor says alert, oriented to name and current circumstances, but without recall of collision. Doctor says, okay, and then I'm going to direct you all the way down to that box, doctor. Do you see where it says mental status? Doctor says, I'm sorry, yes, at the very bottom. Yes, at the very bottom. I do see the words mental status. Okay, what are the words next to the words mental status? If you could read those for the record, please. The doctor says oriented person, oriented place, oriented time, oriented event. Thank you. Doctor, the next page, please. 361, and I'll draw your attention all the way to the bottom of the page underneath where it says addendum. Do you see that? Doctor says, I do see that. Okay, and if you could read for the record, please, what is the date and time of this addendum? The date and time listed is July 31st at 9:08 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, and the comment section starts 17-year-old female. Is that correct? The doctor says, that is correct. I do see those words. Could you read that, please? The doctor says 17-year-old female, apparent driver of a car collided against. Okay, so now if you go to the next page, page 362, do you see where it says patient without recall? The doctor says, sorry, it's very small. It's okay. It's just the next portion of the page. Patient without recall of circumstances or timing of collision. Do you see that? The doctor says, question. If you could just start, you can start reading from the top of that page. The doctor says, okay, building with heavy vehicular damage, 2 other occupants deceased per EMS, unknown time of accident, found by passerby sometime later, patient without recall of circumstances or timing of collision. Would you like me to continue? Yes. Doctor says, unknown LOC, which is abbreviation for loss of consciousness. They just said that she did have that, didn't they? Question. Okay. Doctor says brief extrication from entrapment by, okay. Doctor says an ambulance briefly prior to our arrival on scene. Patient awake, alert. This is a doctor responding. An ambulance briefly prior to our arrival on scene. Patient awake, alert, appropriate, clearly articulated verbal response, and reliably following commands. Complaining of pain with movement of right knee or right elbow associated with obvious deformity, but intact distal sensory motor perfusions for both. Chest and pelvis exam benign. Thank you, doctor. Next page, 363. Do you see page 363? Says, I do. Okay, and what is documented on this page as far as, do you know what the test is, what this test reflects? She says, I do. What is that? This appears to be an electrocardiogram. Okay, that's also known as an EKG. The doctor says, in layman's terms, yes, it's an EKG. Okay, what does an EKG monitor? Doctor says, an EKG is an evaluation of the electrical activity within the heart. Okay, and what are the results of the EKG for Mackenzie? Doctor says, to me, this appears to be a normal exam. Thank you. And again, this is July 31st of 2022. Is that correct? The doctor says that is correct. Thank you. Doctor, I'm going to draw your attention. Flip over to page 372. Are you there, doctor? She says, I am. Okay, I'm going to draw your attention to page 372. Do you see in the middle of the page where it says interval history / events? Do you see that? She says, I do. Okay, what is this section? The doctor says, when our division documents a daily progress note on a patient, we like to keep a section updated with how the patient came to the hospital, how the patient came to be on our service, and the relevant events that have transpired since admission. Okay, and under hospital course, do you see where I'm looking? She says, I do. Okay, and then at the bottom where it says 8/6/2022. So August 6, 2022. Do you see the relevant event? The doctor says, I do. Okay. And what was that relevant event noted here on August 6, 2022? Could you read what that says, please? The doctor says, patient insisting she goes to deceased boyfriend's funeral on 8/7. Threatens to leave against medical advice or unalive herself if she's not allowed to go. So, if Kenzie did this intentionally, as many of you believe, would she be suicidal? Like over not being able to go? If Dom was afraid of Kenzie's driving, I highly doubt he would break up with her in the car. I know that theory has been floating around. I agree. Janie Jack said, so if the side and front airbags went off, then you wouldn't be able to see. So how could you then intentionally aim for the building? I think that as well. Jeff says, yes, facts on airbags. Hmm. I'm reading what you guys are saying. The first time in 20 years. The cops have been to the Russos nearly every 3 weeks for the last 20 years on some criminal BS. They definitely know her for sure. Thank you, Jules. Okay, let's continue. Hi, Keezy. Everyone, please check out Keezy IRL on TikTok. She has great content. She's going to be coming over here. Keezy in the house. Yes, Keezy. We support you. Thank you for being here, girl. Keezy IRL. Go look at her stuff and then come back to me. And then come back to me and let me know what you think. Hi, all. Yeah. Hey, Keezy. Thanks for being here, Keezy. It's extremely rare. Okay, let's continue. So yeah, question. If she was like, oh my God, I'm totally gonna kill Dom, and then she does it, and then she's like in the hospital saying she's gonna unalive herself if she's not allowed to go. I don't know about that. Multiple attempts made to redirect and reason with her were unsuccessful. Thank you, doctor. Doctor, almost done. My next couple of questions are based off medical records number 2 in the binder. If I could draw your attention to that. Mr. McDonald says, is that exhibit 8? Miss Kupak says, that is exhibit 8. Yes. Are you on state's exhibit 8, doctor? She says, I am. Do you see as far as the state exhibit 8, doctor, the front page, is that the certification page or another certification page as you described prior? She says it is. I'm going to draw your attention, if you could, page starting with page 46, please. Let me know when you're there. The doctor says I am there. Okay, I'm going to draw your attention to the bottom of page 46 where it starts to read art therapy notes. Do you see that? The doctor says I do. Okay, and if you could, doctor, starting with the narrative note where it says narrative note art therapist, could you please read what the medical record reflects underneath that narrative note? The doctor says art therapist entered the room. Patient was getting into bed from nursing care, presenting as frustrated. Art therapist introduced self-therapy service role and benefit to patient and her mother. Patient initially accepted then. Question. On the next page, could you please continue? The doctor says declined art therapy service at this time, but agreed to discussion. Art therapist attempt to begin session with a structured intervention for patient to color coffee filter. Leaf cutouts with markers. Patient stated she would be interested to attempt coloring, then declined to focus on her grief. And so many of us thought she was not grieving, but we weren't there in the hospital, respectfully. Yes, Kizzy IRL. I'll drop links to in the description of the video. Kizzy has really good information that you guys might be interested in. Okay, let's continue. Patient then became tearful, processing heavy loss and depression since her accident. So if this was someone who killed someone intentionally, is this like normal? Because I don't think she would be depressed if she was just an evil schmurder and she just got what she wanted according to a lot of you and me too, but, like, this is I don't know. Depression since her accident, patient shared feelings of grief, guilt, and shame. Patient stated she wanted to die and that it was her fault for unaliving her boyfriend. Okay, so this part right here, it was made out to seem like, "Oh my god, I unalived him. I'm confessing." Actually, no. She's in the hospital upset, in pain, and she's feeling guilt. She didn't plan on leaving. How could you say that, Miss Sarcasm? Do you know her? Did she tell you that? Were you there? Were you in the car? Respectfully. Um, is there proof of that somewhere that she didn't plan on living? I feel like a lot of teenagers process feelings via social media like it's their world, so I don't know, I find that odd. Actually, Melly, if she had BPD, she would feel deep, deep guilt. Art therapists acknowledge the feelings as normal and part of grieving, also noting the blame patient was putting onto herself. Thank you, doctor. And the last page I would like to direct your attention to is page 50. Doctor says, I'm there. Interesting. I'm there. Question. Okay, I'm going to draw your attention halfway through underneath where it says, then it's inaudible. Can someone tell him to like speak up clearly, please, in the fucking courtroom? And then do you see where it says narrative inaudible? Again? Yo. Doctor says, I do. Could you start with at beginning of session? Do you see that? Or I'm sorry, AT began session. Doctor says, I do see that. Okay, could you just read starting from there? Doctor says AT began session with a structured intervention for patient to engage with coloring coffee filter paper for building verbal engagement and processing grief. Patient made independent choice of color and composition, choosing blues and greens for a maple leaf. She stated that design represented a pot leaf. Patient began question. Thank you. Sorry, doctor. And then on to the next page, if you could, page 51. Answer, I am there. Question, that was part of the note. I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to pick you up where it starts to say, it's the last one in the section. Parent created artwork. If you can start there, please. The doctor says patient responded to art therapy with goals related to increased self-expression. I'm sorry. Question, that's okay. It says patient created artwork. Doctor says, I'm so sorry. What? Question, that's okay. The doctor says patient created artwork depicting an MJ leaf with a heart in the center. Okay, thank you. Doctor, overall, as far as your review of these medical records, did all of these injuries that were observed by you that Miss Shirilla had, were those injuries consistent with a motor vehicle crash? The doctor says they were. Along with her blood work, is that correct? Doctor says they were. Doctor, while you were treating this individual, did you yourself observe any indication of an emergent situation or any emergent illness that could have affected this car crash, that could have caused this car crash? The doctor says, based on my evaluation of Miss Shirilla on July 31st, I did not find a reason for her to have crashed this car. Thank you, doctor. I did not find a reason for her to have crashed this car. Thank you, doctor. Miss Kupak says nothing further. Mr. McDonald, can we take a 10-minute recess, Judge? The court says, yes, let's take a break. Before we go off the record, doctor, you will remain under oath. So please have no conversations with anyone during this 10-minute break regarding your testimony or this case, okay? If you need to use a restroom, you're free to do that. Can I get you a glass of water? The witness says, a glass of water would be great. The court says, okay, I'll get you a glass of water. You can hang out in here, or if you need to stretch your legs, you can do that. The witness says, thank you. The court says, thank you. Short recess is taken. The court says, we're back on the record in the matter of the state of Ohio versus Mackenzie Shirilla. The doctor remains on the stand. Mr. McDonald, you may inquire. Mr. McDonald says, thank you, Your Honor. And here's a cross-examination. Okay, this will be good. Ronald McDonald. Well, I guess it's good if she's doing art. Yeah, I know. We all thought it was a big deal that she was doing that, but, like, let's be real. Her and Dom loved it. Loved smoking the green. Keezy says, in my opinion, maybe her phone was the one sort of normalcy or comfort she had after literally being in shock surgeries and an overwhelming environment. She experienced something she hadn't before. Good point. Exactly. Sarcasm. We're all just speculating. It seemed like she loved animals. Would she really do that? As an awful person as she appears, I don't know. Right? Hmm. She wasn't trying to unalive herself. I feel like in the investigation, they never really looked into any details. Everyone deserves a fair trial, no matter who you are. Love your channel, Melly. Thank you. Just as I am. You have a nurse with court knowledge. Who's that? Who's a nurse with court knowledge? Anna, don't come in here. Respectfully. You said you didn't like me in other chats. So what are you doing here exactly? You're over there saying that I switched up sides. Why? Because I'm interested in the investigation and the possible parties attached to this. Am I not allowed to do that? Oh, who says I'm not allowed? Let's continue. Cross-examination. Doctor, my name's Jim McDonald. How are you doing this afternoon? Doctor says, how are you? Question, not so well. I guess you're doing okay. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. If anytime you don't understand a question, just ask me to repeat it or rephrase it. Fair enough? Um, yes. Question, how much time did you spend with Mackenzie? The doctor says, I do not recall. Okay. Question, could it have been a little as 5 minutes? The doctor says it could have been. Wait, she examined her for at least 5. Okay, well, then you can see yourself out. Yeah, it's about the trial and reasonable doubt. Okay, so it says it could have been as little as 5 minutes. Answer, it could have been. Question, okay, you're working all the time and you just simply can't remember this particular case, right? The doctor says, I don't remember this particular case well. Okay, I noticed that in the records and specific pages that you were directed to, there were many times where there was POTS written down, but you weren't asked any questions about that, right? Doctor says, I do not recall being asked questions about POTS today. What is POTS? The doctor says, I believe it's referring to postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. Okay, what is that? The doctor says, it's a disease in which patients sometimes have low blood pressure and a high heart rate. Okay, says McDonald, are there any symptoms associated with POTS? The doctor says, it's not a disease I treat, so I do not know. Okay, would you agree that some of the symptoms are lightheadedness? Lightheadedness? The doctor says it could be. With fainting, that is possible. Ah, the possibilities. I love our Melly. Thank you, VK. Hey, Lee. Lee, good evening. Thanks for reading these. Okay, let's continue. This is interesting. That is possible. Difficulty thinking, it could be. And concentrating, the doctor says that is possible. Fatigue, it could be. Headache, the doctor says that is possible. Blurry vision, the doctor says it could be. Palpitations, the doctor says that is possible. Tremor, it could be. And nausea, the doctor says that is possible. Okay, so you were asked some questions about seizures, right? The doctor says yes. Can someone have a seizure in 5 minutes after appear to be normal, right? The doctor says, I think it's possible. Well, and then let's not forget that no one came to the scene for like what, 45 minutes? Hi, Kate. I feel like Kenzie needed to figure out who she was as a person without Dom. Hmm. Doctor says, I think it's possible. Question. Not only is it possible, says McDonald, but it's not abnormal. Doctor says, I would not be able to answer that question in affirmative. McDonald says, okay, and that is because that's outside the scope of your area of expertise. The doctor says, that is correct, sir. Question. Okay, because what is the scope of your area of expertise? Says McDonald. The doctor says, I'm board certified in general surgery. I'm also board certified in surgical critical care. McDonald says, okay, and board certified means you not only are a good doctor, but you took a test and you're better than most doctors because you passed the test, right? The doctor says, it means that I completed a course of training that allowed me to sit for a certification exam that I passed. McDonald says, okay, you're a surgeon? She says, that is correct. Okay, blood oxygen of 82. What does that signify to you? Says McDonald. The doctor says, what are the units for the 82? McDonald says, out of 100, when they give you that, you put that, the doctor says, so you mean a blood oxygen saturation of 82%? McDonald says, thank you. Yes. What does that mean to you? The doctor says, that seems low. McDonald says, that's really low, right? The doctor says, that seems low for a normal adult human being. Question, says McDonald. How many people do you think you've treated in the emergency room over the course of your career? She says hundreds or more. He says hundreds? She says or more. McDonald said hundreds would mean you work 250 days a year. You've been doing surgery for how long? She says I've been in practice since 2017. McDonald says that's 7 years. So you worked over 1,000 days, right? The doctor says yes. McDonald says, okay, and you've seen approximately how many patients on an average day? She says, on an average day, it could be as few as 0, as many as, I'm not sure there's a day where I've seen 30. I'm sure there's a day where I've seen 30 or more. McDonald said, okay, so let's just go in the middle and say 15 an average day. The doctor says, sure. McDonald says 15 times 1,000 is 15,000 people you've seen, right? Would you accept my? The doctor said, sure, that seems like a reasonable number. McDonald says, okay, how many people have you seen with the pulse ox of 82? The doctor says, that's a very specific number. I couldn't testify under oath how many people I've seen with that exact number of 82. McDonald says, I'm not asking for an exact number. Give us your best guess. She says, I'm sure I have seen many people with an oxygen saturation of 82. McDonald says, so out of 15,000 people, you have seen maybe 10, right? She says, I think I've seen more than that. He says, more than 20. The doctor says, I think I've seen more than that. He says, more than 30. She says, I think I've seen more than that. McDonald says, we could keep going, or you could just tell me what the number is that you think to the best of your ability. She says, I wouldn't feel comfortable swearing one way or another. I think I've seen a number of people with an oxygen saturation of 82 at some point in their hospital stay. McDonald says, less than 100. Ms. Kupak says, Your Honor, I'm going to object. He's asked. The doctor says, it might. The court says, overruled. Booba Kitty says, it is possible to suffer a non-epileptic seizure even if you don't have a medical condition. Okay. 0, the medical test, and her parents never found anything more about it. Okay, let's continue. Hi, beautifully. He says, overruled. The doctor says, be more than 100. Mr. McDonald said, it's rare. The doctor says, in my line of work, a low oxygen saturation is not necessarily uncommon because patients are critically ill. And one of the things that can happen when you are critically ill is that your oxygen saturation can be low. Oh, saturation, sorry. Doc McDonald says, you asked some questions about rugs. The doctor says, I was asked questions about rugs. McDonald says, about mushrooms, right? She says, I was asked to read a line containing the word mushroom. McDonald says, what, if anything, do you know about mushrooms? She says, they're eukaryotes. They're fungi. Eukaryotes? They're fungi. It is also a slang term for some types of rugs that are obtained illegally. And there are hallucinogenics, right? Says McDonald. She says the substances that are used as illicit substances, I think, can be hallucinogenic based on what I've heard. McDonald says, sure. And learned being in the emergency room and in your studies. The doctor says, that is correct. McDonald said, and it makes people hallucinate, right? The doctor says, it can make people hallucinate. McDonald says, now you talked a lot. You testified for about an hour. And wouldn't it be fair to say most of it, you have no recollection of what you testified to? The doctor says, there are things that I testified to today that I do not have independent recollection of. That is correct. Why did the captain say that? And then she says that too. Ooh. Well, Rosie did not drive by. We already debunked that like 2 lives ago. Rosie was not near the crash. We thought she was, but she was not. So respectfully, apologies owed to Rosie because I accused her of that on here. And she was, I believe, at the main road, not by the crash, according to the map. So I'll have to, maybe in the next slide, I'll bring that over. No, it doesn't matter whether I like her or not. It matters the facts of the case. Thank you. And parts. Hey, Julio. Like it seemed like she was close to it, but once you actually look on the map, it's actually not that close, if I'm correct. But maybe we can review it. Rosie also said she talked to the detective. Yeah, I need to review that still. Let's move on. She says, there are things I testified to that I do not have independent recollection of. That is correct. McDonald says, and you certainly don't know how that information was put into those medical records. The doctor said it was probably typed or dictated into the medical record. Question, but you don't know who provided the information. The doctor says, the notes have an author. McDonald says, okay. Doctor says, which implies that they're the person who put into the medical record, who put that into the medical record. McDonald said, is your name anywhere on there as author of any of these notes? She says, yes. McDonald says, for how many pages? I don't know how many. McDonald says, approximately. She says, I don't know how many pages it comes to when they print it on a piece of paper. McDonald says, but you don't know how the information was received or when, right? In general. She says, in all of her medical records, sir? McDonald says, yes. The doctor says, well, some of the information documented in the medical record would have been generated by our laboratory or our radiology department. I think the rumor was started here. No, you're wrong. It was not started here. Let's continue. Some of the information in the medical, she says, some of the information in the medical record would have been written in there by staff at Metro Health Medical Center providing care to Ms. Shirilla, and there are documents listed in this medical record which seem to have been scanned in from EMS run sheets, for example. McDonald says, you were asked to read portions where the record said that Mackenzie had no recollection, right? She responds, I did read those words. That is correct. McDonald said, and it was consistent throughout the medical records that she had no recall of the event, right? Respectfully, that data about Rosie driving by was actually in Detective Hazu's report, a text from Houston. So that's where we got it from. And it was consistent through the medical records that she had no recall of the event, right? She says, I did not review every page listed in these 2 binders, but from the sections that I reviewed today in the court, that is correct. McDonald said, and that's not abnormal as it relates to someone who was involved in a serious car accident, right? The doctor says, that is not abnormal. That is correct. McDonald says, and in fact, that is typical. She says, I don't know if it would be described as typical. Many patients come to us having perfect recall of the traumatic event in which they were involved. Many other patients do not. McDonald says, you talked about some reads, blood levels that were abnormal, right? I did talk about that. That is correct. Were any of these readings consistent with someone who has POTS? The doctor says, POTS is outside of my scope of practice, so I do not know. McDonald says, okay, high glucose does mean that you have high blood sugar and you're likely to faint or could faint. The doctor says, all it means is that your blood sugar is high. McDonald says, and do many people faint when they have high blood sugar? The doctor says, that's not been the case in my experience. McDonald says, okay. And then finally, you were asked about some art therapy notes and patient insisting that they go to the funeral, right? The doctor says, I did read those things. McDonald says, you read them? The doctor says, I did. McDonald says, thank you. And then there's redirect examination. Ms. Kupok says, by Ms. Kupok, doctor, counsel just asked you several times about the 82 or 83 blood ox level. Is that correct? The doctor says he did. Okay, and just let me reiterate, your response to that was in your realm of trauma. 82 or 83 is not uncommon for blood ox. Is that correct? The doctor says it is not necessarily uncommon. That is correct. Okay, but if you recall when you were going through the medical records, doctor, I had you read from your medical records a blood ox level of 98. Do you recall that? The doctor says, I do recall that. And do you recall that was on July 31st at 7:44 a.m. in the morning? The doctor says, I do recall reading that. Yes. Thank you. And counsel asked you a couple questions about POTS. Do you recall when you were reading through the medical records, the section where it says medical history and it said POTS for mother? Do you remember reading that? The doctor says, I do remember reading that. Okay, do you also remember describing that was information that had been provided by the mother? Is that correct? The doctor says yes. Okay, and with regards to the mother providing that, did it say in that section per EMS POTS with the medical history? The doctor says, I'm sorry, one more time? Did it say in that section for reporting medical history where it said POTS for mother, did it say that POTS was reported by the ENT that transported her to the hospital? Did it say that they reported that? The doctor says no. Those words do not appear in that document. Did it say that the patient herself reported a history of this? The doctor says no, that doesn't. No, I don't believe that's what that said. Okay, and did any other doctor or any other medical record indicate this was a history? She says, not to the best of my knowledge. Thank you. Again, the last question, doctor, I may have asked you this. You reviewed many neurological testing. An EKG, there was blood pressure taken. Is that correct? I think you read two portions where there were blood pressure that was taken in the morning. The doctor says that is correct. And do you note that the blood pressure was normal? The doctor says there was at least one blood pressure reading that was normal, and there was at least one blood pressure reading that was abnormal. Okay. And with regards to her heart and her neurological testing, Mr. McDonald says, objection. Ms. Kupok says, do you recall that that was normal? The court says, overruled. The doctor says, I do not recall reading anything in the record suggesting that her heart and what was the other organ system you asked about? Her neurological system. The doctor says her neurological systems were normal. Both systems were normal. You said you did not recall reading. The doctor says, I do not recall reading anything in the medical record documenting that her heart or her neurological systems were abnormal other than this diagnosis of POTS. Wait, so she's saying that it was on the mother's, but that she doesn't remember that. The ENT transport, did it say they reported that? She says, no, they do not appear in the document. But then it says, I do not recall reading reading documenting that her heart or her neurological systems were abnormal other than this diagnosis of POTS. Question, provided by her mother, is that correct? The doctor says, and that history of POTS was provided by her mother. The doctor says, no other doctor or ENT on the scene provided that information. Is that correct? Wouldn't that need to be like a specialist who diagnoses that? Hmm. I don't know. Her mom said she had a seizure in the past. Well, you know what? I was looking at the ex-boyfriend's interview, and I think it was in his where he does mention fainting. So we might have to review that. She says no other ENT in the scene provided information. Is that correct? She says, not to the best of my knowledge on July 31st. Oh no, he said that she would faint if she would trip. Um, Anyways, let's go back to this. Answer, no, not to the best of my knowledge on July 31st. Question, thank you, doctor. Ms. Kupak, nothing further. The court, Mr. McDonald, anything else? Mr. McDonald says nothing. The court says, doctor, thank you so much for being here. You are free to step down. The witness says, thank you. The court says, do you want to come gather the exhibits, please? Is she getting the next witness? Mr. Troop says, I think so. The court says, who is it? Detective Troop says, Prosecutor Troop says, Your Honor, the state calls Sergeant Adam McQuaid. The court says, hello. Okay, the witness says, hello. The court says, you can come around here and please raise your right hand. Okay, so the court says, you may take a seat. Can we approach for a moment? The court says, sure, we're back on the record. Okay, we're going to stop there. How long have I been live? Yeah, about 2 hours. Okay, so we're going to stop about 3 hours. We're going to stop there with the next witness, Adam McQuaid, which is a Brooklyn police officer who works with other cities to do this type of work. That's who the next witness is. So tomorrow we shall finish volume 1 and go into volume 2. This is rather interesting. I'm going to go through these thoroughly because I have questions of what we read today. I would start to have shake if I have. Yeah. Okay, these transcripts are really good, and I'm glad I got my hands on them. We are going to compare with the appeal. What does that have anything to do with this? With what? I don't think the paramedics would know any of that information. Yeah, I don't think so either. Wait, I thought okay, yeah, you're right, Boo Boo Kitty, because it says on here, yes, POTS is commonly and most recommendedly diagnosed by a cardiologist. So there's that. I wonder if they had a cardiologist. Anyways, shout out to you guys for being here. 3 hours later, we're getting through the transcripts. Tyler Proctor says that Dom never wanted her to take certain drugs because of her seizures. Yes, you're right, Boo Boo Kitty. In that interview, police interview. We're going to compare and contrast all of the documents. It's diagnosed by a team of doctors. Well, I hope they had that team there to rule that out. Anyways, make sure you hit the like button. I know it was rough in here. That's why I thought it might have been a false diagnosis. Yeah, respectfully. Yeah, neurology and a cardiologist, it says. Which interview? The ex-boyfriend, Tyler Proctor. Someone said you're hanging out with people who weren't. No. You should go look at Keezy IRL and tell me what you think. Thanks, Melly, much appreciated. Yeah, thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. She was in shock. Her body was traumatized and shutting down. Of course, she's not going to start spouting off her medical history. I guess. That's what I think too, but I guess not. Cardiologist makes sense since it has to do with circulation and gravity. Thanks, Scala. I will schedule the next reading for these court transcripts for tomorrow. Shout out to everyone that's here and remained cool and positive and just chilling, talking. No, I doubt it was. Anyways, that is it for today. Please make sure you hit the like button. Go onto the Kenzie playlist. There's a lot of videos there. Thanks for reading Gotta Play the Very Beginning. Yes, please do. Thank you all for you guys for being here. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day and keep your eye out for part 2 of the transcript readings for tomorrow. Bye.